In his 2005 Game Developers Conference keynote, Satoru Iwata opened with the words,
"On my business card, I am a corporate president. In my mind, I am a game developer. But in my heart, I am a gamer."
These few sentences would be echoed in everything he did, from leading the most successful game console launch Nintendo ever had, to innovating the way gamers interacted with developers. Iwata's creativity and dedication would cement him as an icon in both Nintendo and the video game industry as a whole. This is the story of how a young student playing with a calculator would go on to become one of the most widely known and warmest faces in the industry. This is Satoru Iwata. Satoru Iwata was born on December 6, 1959 in Sapporo, Japan, as the son of a politician. However, despite his father's background in politics, Iwata was drawn to technology, even at a young age. He said that his first encounter with computers was during his years in middle school in Hokkaido. Every Sunday, he would travel to the nearby Sapporo subway station, where there were several pay-per-hour public computers, and on them he would play a simple numeric game titled Game 31. This was so early in the concept of computing that the words microprocessor and personal computer did not exist. His interest in games and computers would follow Iwata into high school, where he worked a part-time job just to save enough money to buy an early Hewlett-Packard calculator for 160,000 yen. It should be noted that this was during the mid-70s when the yen was at an all-time high. The price of that calculator today would be in the range of 4,800 American dollars. This particular calculator came with a magnetic card reader, which allowed the device to read and write simple programs. And using this feature, Iwata began creating basic number games that he shared with his classmates. Watching his friends enjoy the games he created brought Iwata great joy, and from that point forward, he felt that his path in life was set. In 1978, Iwata began attending the Tokyo Institute of Technology, where he studied engineering and computer sciences, the closest equivalent to a game programming course at the time. However, the classes offered by the university didn't challenge Iwata, who dedicated much of his time in high school to learning all that he could about computers. So instead of spending time studying in school, Iwata would often travel to a local department store, the first in Tokyo to have an entire section dedicated solely to personal computers. Here, Iwata met like-minded students with whom he would discuss the growing industries of technology and video games. This group would eventually become a close-knit circle of friends, and before long formed a club that would evolve into a company called HAL Laboratories. Though Iwata did not co-found the company, he was amongst its first employees. He recalled that there were just 5 people working there when he joined. The name HAL was chosen as a nod to the antagonistic supercomputer from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, and because the letters H, A, and L put them one step ahead of computer company IBM. However, despite this lofty name, the company had much more humble beginnings. Iwata and his co-workers rented a small, single-room apartment, which acted as their first headquarters. Though he was both determined and enthusiastic about games and programming, Iwata argued with his family over the decision to join such a small and unproven company. His father, who was elected the mayor of the port city Muroran, was especially distasteful of Iwata's path. The conversation ultimately ended with the elder Iwata refusing to speak to his son for 6 months. Iwata once reasoned, "They must have thought I was joining a religious cult." Regardless, Iwata stayed firm in his decision and helped the burgeoning company create some of their earliest games. His first credit was for the MSX title Super Billiards. He also ended up filling as many roles as the company needed him to, often acting as a game designer, a programmer, and even overseeing marketing. His passion often led him to work on weekends and holidays, simply because he wanted to. Iwata's proficiency in programming and design garnered him the respect of his peers, and he quickly rose to the title of Coordinator of Software Production in 1983. After the announcement and release of the Nintendo Family Computer, or Famicom, the team at HAL was immediately drawn to the device. Iwata had expert knowledge of the Famicom's inner workings, as the console shared components with the Commodore PET, a console he worked on while in college. HAL reached out to Nintendo seeking a partnership, and Iwata personally traveled to their Kyoto headquarters and met with the company. While this might have intimidated others, Iwata was confident in his abilities. He once claimed that he believed that he could write better NES code than even Nintendo's EAD engineers, or that he could write the fastest, most compact code. Nintendo's management saw potential in Iwata and HAL and eventually hired the company to assist in the development of Pinball, a title that was falling behind schedule. Work was quickly completed on the title, and it released in Japan on February 2, 1984. Pinball marked the beginning of many early collaborations between Nintendo and HAL during the era, and Iwata worked on many of them, including Balloon Fight, NES Open Tournament, and the 1987 Famicom port of Joust, just to name a few. Before too long, HAL Laboratory was given the opportunity to create an original IP to call their own. Iwata decided that the company should focus on making a game for beginners, a title so uncomplicated that anyone could pick it up and play, but challenging enough to be fun for more hardcore gamers. He took pitches from anyone in the company, and chose an idea titled Twinkle Popo from a fresh-faced designer named Masahiro Sakurai. Iwata's directive of simplicity ended up rippling through the entirety of this new game, from its level design to its art direction, eventually taking up the final form of Kirby's Dream Land. The title was released on April 27, 1992 in Japan and August 2, 1992 in North America, and it has sold over 5 million copies to date. Dreamland was a hit for Nintendo and HAL, inspiring numerous sequels and spin-offs throughout the years. Kirby has since become the de facto mascot for HAL. However, despite the success of their new game and their growing relationship with Nintendo, HAL had fallen to the brink of bankruptcy in 1993. The company was only rescued through the intervention of Hiroshi Yamauchi, the then president of Nintendo, who offered aid in exchange for two things: that HAL would become an exclusive second-party developer for Nintendo, and that Satoru Iwata would become the company's president. HAL and Iwata accepted the offer, which would prove to be the great turning point for both the developer and the man, and Yamauchi's trust in Iwata was not misplaced. Sakurai later remembered about Iwata. Even though he didn't start out in the managing field, he read numerous management books, and he would ask for advice from the necessary people that he would take to heart. And that paid off. During his tenure as the president of HAL, Iwata successfully led the company away from bankruptcy, all without losing his knack for programming and design. Oftentimes, he would personally step in to save games from disaster. One such instance was Mother 2, or Earthbound as it came to be known in North America. The title was being worked on by a different team than the original Mother game, and 4 years into development, it was still riddled with bugs and nowhere near completion. When Iwata, who was acting as a producer on the title, visited developer Ape Incorporated, he famously said, "If you're going to continue to make this game like this, it's going to take 2 years. He then told the team that he could help, but they had two paths forward. He explained, "If we used what you have now and fix it, it will take 2 years. If we can start fresh, it'll take half a year." Project lead Shigesato Itoi and Ape Incorporated accepted Iwata's offer and threw out what they'd already completed. And with Iwata's help, many of the problems the team were running into were solved in just a month. True to his word, Iwata helped complete Earthbound's development in just 6 months. Another title that faced problems in its development was Game Freak's Pokémon Stadium. Pokémon Red and Green had a very rocky development, and the code for the games was complicated and fragile. To make things worse, there were no specification documents left by the original programmers, so porting the battle system from Red and Green to Stadium was proving to be incredibly difficult for Game Freak and Nintendo. Though he didn't officially work at either company, Iwata ended up acting as an intermediary between the two. He'd also aided in the overseas localization for Red and Green and studied their source code so that he could better suggest changes. So when he heard of these difficulties, Iwata stepped in and ported the battle mechanics to Stadium himself in just 1 week. When Shigeki Morimoto, an original programmer for Pokémon Red and Green, heard of Iwata's accomplishments, he remembered exclaiming, "What kind of company president is this?" When he later thought back on this experience, Iwata explained that he stepped in simply because, "I felt that for the whole team at Nintendo, the biggest priority was to not do anything that would adversely influence the development of Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Silver, so I very naturally slotted in on the development side for Pokemon." His concern for the development of Gold and Silver eventually led Iwata to aid in the development for those games as well. Game Freak was concerned that their vision for the titles wouldn't fit on the limited memory space available for Game Boy cartridges. Upon hearing these concerns, Iwata once again used his talents to create compression tools so efficient that they allowed the developers to effectively double the size of the game's overworld. When later asked about these tools, all Iwata had to say was, "Well, I was willing to do whatever I could." A final project that Iwata personally saved was a 4-player fighting game from Kirby creator Masahiro Sakurai, codenamed Kokudo Gimo Ryo, or Dragon King, the fighting game. The young developer approached Iwata with this idea and was immediately given the green light to work on it. However, at the time, HAL had no spare programmers to work on the prototype, so Iwata took on the role himself, spending his weekends coding early builds of the game. After Sakurai had difficulty coming up with original characters for the title, it was instead decided to use Nintendo's pre-existing characters. Iwata and Sakurai weren't even sure if they'd be able to get approval to use the characters, so they didn't seek permission, moving forward with a demo featuring Mario, Donkey Kong, Fox McCloud, and Samus Aran. This title eventually became Super Smash Bros., which went on to become one of Nintendo's most successful franchises, and all because Iwata saw potential in an idea and programmed the prototype himself. As the president of HAL, Iwata had frequently proven himself as both a developer and a manager, and Hiroshi Yamauchi had taken notice. In 2000, he offered Iwata the position of head of Nintendo's corporate planning division and a seat on the company's board of directors, a proposal that Iwata accepted. Over the next 2 years, he sought to reduce the company's costs and streamline the production of their games, even stepping in once again to help save Masahiro Sakurai's Super Smash Bros. Melee. It appeared as if Melee wasn't going to make its release date, so Iwata reviewed the code and fixed several bugs himself, all in the span of just 3 weeks. Iwata later recalled his time working on the game. "I was right there, sitting by programmers in the trenches, reading code together, finding the bugs, and fixing them together. And because of that, the game made it out on time." Iwata's efforts over these 2 years again proved his ability as a leader, and made him a natural choice for promotion within the company. In May of 2002, Nintendo announced that Hiroshi Yamauchi was retiring as the president of Nintendo, and that Satoru Iwata had been chosen as his successor, the first outside of the Yamauchi bloodline. Iwata's tenure was a breath of fresh air for Nintendo. One of his first decisions as president was to personally meet with all 40 of the company's department heads and roughly 150 employees, a stark contrast to Yamauchi electing to rarely ever meet with employees one-on-one. Additionally, where Yamauchi tended to make decisions based on intuition and past experience, Iwata was driven by data and evidence, and he wanted others to work alongside him to keep the company in check. To do this, he promoted Shigeru Miyamoto, Ginyo Takeda, Yoshihiro Mori, and Shinji Hitano as representatives on Nintendo's board of directors, equaling his own position. However, despite remaining a profitable company, when Iwata was promoted as president, Nintendo was starting to lose momentum. In comparison to their competitors, the GameCube was struggling to perform, even after Iwata fostered a productive partnership with Japanese publisher Capcom. He'd also noticed a declining interest in video gaming by the general public. It was becoming increasingly obvious to Iwata that Nintendo needed a new direction. Iwata commissioned a year-long analysis of the industry, which concluded that pushing for the most advanced hardware was not the most effective path forward. This was perhaps some vindication for Iwata, who, as early as 2002, felt that gaming had become far too exclusive, that the industry was too concerned with the technology behind the games instead of the games themselves. Iwata oversaw the development of new hardware that focused more on inventing new and innovative ways to play games instead of trying to compete with cutting-edge graphical technology, a direction that Nintendo still follows to this day. The first piece of new hardware influenced by this decision was the Nintendo DS, a handheld console that featured 2 screens, one of which was a touchscreen. This proved to be a turning point for the struggling Nintendo. The DS would go on to become the second highest-selling console of all time, moving more than 154 million units during its lifespan. As Iwata desired, the DS appealed to gamers and non-gamers alike, with titles like Nintendogs and Brain Age becoming hits. It was only natural that Nintendo would seek to emulate this success with their next home console. Discussions of a new console began in 2003 after Yamauchi encouraged Iwata to pursue development of a revolutionary product. Iwata, Miyamoto, and Takeda had several meetings to brainstorm new ideas, and Takeda was eventually assigned to design new hardware, with Iwata giving him the directive that a mom has to like it. The company took a risk by investing in new, accelerometer-based motion sensing control inputs, instead of more powerful graphical displays. The device, then codenamed the Nintendo Revolution, compilation was publicly revealed by Iwata at E3 2005, who pulled it from his jacket pocket and held it above his head to highlight its small size and lightweight. The company elected to wait to reveal the console's remote and nunchuck controller until the Tokyo Game Show later that same year, and the Wii as its true name in April of 2006. Despite a mixed initial reaction to the name and design, Nintendo was steadfast in their decision. In 2006, Iwata said that video games are meant to be one thing: fun. Fun for everyone, and insisted that the remote control design would make the device immediately accessible. Regardless of initial doubts, the Wii launched in late 2006 to incredible success, shipping over 100 million units during its lifetime. Even more than that, however, Nintendo and their console created a new trend within the industry, forging the way forward for companies to experiment with motion control and other unique inputs to their video games. Iwata and his vision for a revolution changed what it meant to be a gamer, opening the label for anyone and everyone who wanted to play. During this period, Iwata became well known to the gaming public through his series of Iwata Asks interviews, where he would personally sit down with game developers and other staff to ask questions about their games. In these, he'd often share anecdotes about his time as a programmer, insights into Nintendo's history, and his own philosophies on game design. Additionally, he became even more recognizable for his appearance in Nintendo Directs, a series of online presentations that the company began broadcasting in 2011. Though the Directs were used as a medium to announce new games and showcase gameplay, Iwata approached them with the same creativity that he did with the rest of his projects, acting out occasional skits with other Nintendo executives and employees. These presentations have proved to be a massive hit, and have since replaced traditional press conferences as Nintendo's primary method of previewing their games to the public. Nintendo prospered under Iwata during most of his leadership, with new variations of the Wii and DS selling spectacularly during their run. However, poor marketing and low third-party support meant that their newest console, the Wii U, struggled from its release. This slow start meant that the company began taking losses in 2013, but Iwata refused to let this negatively affect his employees. To protect them from layoffs, he personally slashed his own salary in half, and flat out refused to fire anyone as he felt that it would hurt employee morale. And yet, despite this, things only got worse. In 2014, a cancerous tumor was discovered in his bile duct, which caused him to undergo surgery immediately. This forced Iwata to miss a planned appearance at E3 2014, which caused great concern amongst the gaming community. Fans and colleagues sent their well wishes, and even the online image board 4chan sent Iwata a crowdsourced get well soon card. His road to recovery was slow and difficult, but even through this, he never lost his smile or his stride. He even decided to publicly update his Me to reflect the weight he'd lost during his illness. In June of 2015, Iwata was once again unable to attend E3 because of his health. He was later hospitalized once again because of complications from his illness, though this did not stop him from continuing his work. Even in the hospital, Iwata was exchanging ideas with the Pokemon company Tsunekazu Ishihara about the game that would eventually become Pokemon Go. However, the public did not understand how truly serious his condition was, and sadly, on July 11, 2015, Satoru Iwata passed away. The next day, news of his passing spread throughout the industry, with fans, news outlets, and even competitors all mourning in equal measure. Iwata was buried on July 16, 2015, and his funeral was attended by thousands. During that day, former Sonic team lead Yuji Naka said that even the sky in Kyoto is crying. No one can deny the impact Satoru Iwata had on the gaming industry. Under his leadership, Nintendo entered a new era of success, and as a result of his efforts, the industry was pushed forward into a new state of thinking. An entire new market of gamers was opened up. His incredible talents as a programmer helped to create some of the most celebrated and widely played video games ever released, yet he rejected praise for his accomplishments, claiming that he was just doing his job. It's clear that no matter where he was in his life, whether it be in a subway station in Hokkaido or at the head of the largest gaming company in the world, Satoru Iwata remained one thing: a gamer.
He created the most iconic video game character of all time, and his games have sold over 1 billion copies all around the world. By 2006, he'd become so valuable to Nintendo that, for his own safety and the company's peace of mind, they told him he wasn't allowed to ride his bike to work anymore. In 2011, rumors of his retirement sent Nintendo's stock plummeting over $500 million in a single day. This is the story of how a child growing up in rural Japan became the most influential video game designer of all time. This is Shigeru Miyamoto. He was born November 16, 1952, in a small rural town called Sonobe in Kyoto Prefecture, Japan. His father was an English teacher at a local school, and on weekends, he took his family to the big city to watch Western films, especially Disney movies. Shigeru was a curious child, spending his days adventuring through the lush forests, mountains, and castle ruins surrounding his village. When he got home, he liked to watch puppet shows on television, like Hirokori Hayutenjima, and looking back as an adult, he even said that one of its characters, Don Gabancho, might have even influenced the creation of Mario. From a young age, Shigeru loved entertaining the people around him and would stitch together handmade puppets and put on shows for his classmates. In middle school, he joined the basketball team, but after getting into a fight with one of his teammates, he quit to establish a manga club with his friends, which he continued until graduation. He dreamt of someday becoming a manga artist and wrote letters to his favorite mangakas like Shotaro Ishinomori, who'd created Kamen Rider and worked on manga like Astro Boy. In high school, Shigeru branched out and joined a music club, learning to play the guitar and developing a strong affection for the banjo. He loved music ever since his parents surprised him with a ukulele for Christmas as a kid. When he was older, he even built his own ukulele out of wood and yarn, but made it just a neck and no body, so he could practice late into the night without ever waking his family. In college, he joined a band and got into bluegrass, which he still plays to this very day. But Shigeru knew that not everybody could become a famous musician, so he ultimately chose a more pragmatic path with industrial design. He studied hard and got his degree, although he did have to repeat a year, much to his parents' disappointment. Shigeru didn't have a job lined up after graduating from Kanazawa College of Art in 1977, but one company in Kyoto did catch his eye while he was job hunting, a card and toy manufacturer called Nintendo. He submitted his application as an industrial designer, but Nintendo turned him down, saying they just weren't interested. But Shigeru refused to take no for an answer. His father had a mutual friend with Nintendo's then president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, and after some string pulling, Shigeru got a one-on-one interview with President Yamauchi. During the interview, he showed off some toys he'd made and left such a good impression on Yamauchi that he was hired as Nintendo's very first industrial designer. He later heard through the grapevine that President Yamauchi applied for a patent on one of the toys Shigeru brought into the interview and never told him. Miyamoto's earliest assignments were mostly designing packaging for Disney-themed board games and various other Nintendo products, but as luck would have it, he found himself in the exact right place at the exact right time. After his first year at Nintendo, Space Invaders took the world by storm, grossing nearly $4 billion and launching the then niche video game industry into a massive mainstream business. And Nintendo wanted a piece of the action. In 1979, Miyamoto was tasked with his first video game project, designing the exterior of the color TV game Block Kuzushi, containing 6 variations of the Atari game Breakout. The Block Kuzushi was one of Nintendo's earliest attempts at breaking into the then booming video game industry. Miyamoto also received his first software assignment, a game called Seesaw, which, despite its simplicity, he was never able to finish. Years later, Miyamoto reminisced about the unfinished game in Nintendo Official Magazine, explaining that Seesaw was actually the brainchild of Gunpei Yokoi, the man who created the Game Boy, who was both Miyamoto's boss as well as his mentor. He said, "Seesaw, that was Gunpei Yokoi's idea. He wanted a game where you bounce on the seesaw and bounce up off of it, but we couldn't figure out how to do it. It was really difficult. If you get on one end, the other end goes up. And if you hit one end real hard, the other end goes up just as hard. But we couldn't do it." Miyamoto just didn't yet have the skill to execute even this simple concept, although he later revisited the idea to create the lifts in Super Mario Bros. What was once impossible for him eventually became just a tiny slice of his 1985 masterpiece. The first game he ever completed was the 1979 arcade shooter Sheriff, where players controlled a gunslinger on a mission to rescue a woman captured by bandits. It was the first ever Nintendo game with a story centered around the damsel in distress idea, a theme that Miyamoto would later use as an archetype for games like Donkey Kong, Super Mario, and The Legend of Zelda. His next game was the top-down shooter Space Firebird, and then the much more successful Radar Scope. In a bid to capitalize on Radar Scope's success, Nintendo of America imported 3,000 arcade cabinets from Nintendo HQ. But the game wasn't nearly as popular in the US as it was in Japan. Nintendo of America only managed to sell about a third of their Radar Scope cabinets, leaving them with millions of dollars worth of unsold product. NOA's president, Minoru Arakawa, was in a panic and asked Yamauchi if there was some way he could convert all of those unsold Radar Scopes into a completely different game. Yamauchi agreed and saddled Yokoi and Miyamoto with the conversion project. Whatever this new game was gonna be, it had to run on the exact same hardware as Radar Scope, which forced the two designers to think within strict limitations, but outside the box. At the time, Nintendo was making Popeye products like playing cards and even a Game & Watch, so Miyamoto decided to convert Radar Scope into a Popeye game. The premise was simple and reminiscent of Sheriff. The hero Popeye would rescue the damsel in distress, Olive Oil, from her brutish kidnapper Bluto. Though the license fell through, so Miyamoto had to replace all the Popeye characters with brand new ones. So, Olive Oil became Pauline, Bluto was swapped out for Donkey Kong, and Popeye was transformed into an Italian carpenter called Jumpman. Miyamoto devoted himself entirely to the conversion project, telling his friends they wouldn't see him for a few months until the job was done. He worked day and night, and even took baths at work, later recalling, "At the time, I was living in company-owned housing, just across the river from the office, so every day, I was just going back and forth between the office and the company housing. Thank goodness we had a company bathtub. There was also a water boiler that was used to make the Hanafuda playing cards, and the water from this boiler was also used for a bathtub. The employees making the Hanafuda could wash their sweat away in the bath after work, and at night, when nobody was around, you could hang out there for a long time. It totally saved me." Miyamoto and Yokoi originally planned for the screen to scroll like a cartoon, but those plans fell through when it became clear that Radar Scope's arcade boards were not capable of that. So they decided to make 4 separate screens, sort of like panels in a comic strip. Miyamoto initially wanted Donkey Kong to be played with only a joystick, but Radar Scope's cabinet had both a joystick and 1 button. It had to be used somehow, so they decided may as well be used for jumping. A decision that went on to have a much bigger impact on the video game industry than they ever could have imagined. Development took 5 months. Then, after all of the Radar Scopes were manually converted, Donkey Kong quickly grew into a massive success. Not only did Nintendo of America manage to sell all 2,000 cabinets they were trying to get rid of, but they sold 60,000 more after that, raking in hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. And that was just the first year alone. NOA president Arakawa's biggest problem transformed into his biggest asset. Then, he invested that huge pile of cash into 27 acres of land to expand Nintendo of America into the powerhouse that it is today. As Donkey Kong fever swept the globe, Miyamoto followed up with games like DK Jr., Donkey Kong 3, and Mario Bros. But none of them really managed to recapture the magic of the original. Mario Bros, for example, only sold 3,800 cabinets in the US, and as arcade sales continued to decline, Yamauchi began preparations for Nintendo's next chapter by introducing its first home console, the Famicom. He also established a brand new development team called Nintendo Research and Development 4, setting up Miyamoto as its chief producer. R&D 4 got to work crafting games for Famicom, placing a special emphasis on sports titles that they hoped would appeal to as wide an audience as possible. Miyamoto designed baseball, golf, and tennis all in time for the console's North American launch, where it was there renamed the Nintendo Entertainment System. Miyamoto was a game-making machine, pumping out as many as 8 games a year, including Duck Hunt, Excite Bike, Ice Climber, and as fate would have it, he finally got the chance to make a fully licensed licensed Popeye game. One of the more notable titles was Devil World, which released in Japan and Europe, but famously became the only Miyamoto title that was never released in the US. Well, at least not until 2023, where it finally landed on Nintendo Switch Online. But back in the 80s, Nintendo of America had a policy against religious iconography, so a game where you're fighting the devil using Christian crosses and Bibles, that wasn't gonna fly. Devil World's most significant legacy, however, was that it was the first Miyamoto game made together with Satoshi Tajiri, who quickly became one of Miyamoto's greatest assets. By the time Miyamoto finished his 20th game, he'd acquired not only the skill and experience, but just as importantly, he now had the team he needed to start a massive new project, a title that would change video games forever and secured his place in the history books. We're talking Super Mario Brothers. Miyamoto combined everything he'd learned since giving up on Seesaw. The slopes from Donkey Kong, the vines from DK Jr., the bigger characters of Devil World, and horizontal scrolling from Excitebike. Even though Super Mario Bros. Was an unprecedented undertaking, he simultaneously began work on a brand new IP at the same time, based on his adventures as a kid. While Mario was a linear game, Miyamoto wanted to build an open world, recreating the feeling of exploring his hometown village, like the Sonobe River, the Tenjin Mountain, and the ruins of Sonobe Castle. When Super Mario finally hit store shelves in '85, it was praised by critics and fans alike, eventually selling over 40 million copies. The Legend of Zelda launched a few months later, and it took the world by storm all over again, selling 1 million units on its first day and going on to sell many millions more. Miyamoto delivered 2 blockbusters back to back, and that catapulted Nintendo's first home console to the top of the sales charts and solidified himself as the world's most respected video game developer. He quickly rose to the ranks of Nintendo's corporate structure, which meant spending less time designing and more time supervising. His old friend from Devil World, Takashi Tezuka, took on the role of co-directing for Super Mario 2 and 3, and for Zelda 2, Miyamoto was much less hands-on, only serving as producer. By the time Nintendo started ramping up to release their next home console, the Super Famicom, Miyamoto had reached his late 30s and was starting to think about settling down. He struck up a relationship with a girl named Yasuko, who he eventually married and had a couple of kids with, a son and a daughter. While his personal life was maturing, so was his professional life. Nintendo reorganized his development team, R&D4, into a new team called EAD, Entertainment Analysis and Development. This new structure brought the development of hardware and software under one roof, with the strategic goal of creating synergies that could give Nintendo an advantage over their competitors, especially their Tokyo-based rival, Sega Corporation. Miyamoto's first task as head of EAD software was producing F-Zero as a Super Famicom launch title, which he quickly followed up with mega hits like Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and Super Mario Kart. EAD teamed up with English developers Argonaut Software, the creators of the Super FX chip, to develop games like Star Fox that made the use of 3D polygons, with Miyamoto using his love of puppets, particularly the British show Thunderbirds, to come up with the game's characters and setting. These early 3D entries helped prepare Miyamoto and EAD for the next console generation. They even started working on a Mario 64 prototype as early as 1991. By now, Miyamoto had reached middle age, and fully conscious that he'd entered the back nine of his existence, he decided to take his personal health much more seriously. He quit playing pachinko, a sitting-styled arcade game similar to slot machines, and filled his newfound free time swimming at a local health club. He also quit smoking, but admitted to reporters that he'd accidentally traded one vice for another, as he'd caught himself eating way more sweets. He literally pointed at his gut to show them that the proof was in the pudding. The Nintendo 64 was Miyamoto's first time contributing to a console's creation, and his name even appears on several patents, including the N64 controller and memory pack. His biggest focus, however, was bringing the Big N's hugest franchises into the third dimension. At the same time, he was also producing his final Game Boy game, a little indie RPG called Pokemon Red and Green. In fact, it was Miyamoto's idea to split the game up into 2 versions to encourage trading between players, and it was also thanks to Miyamoto that the games ended up with 150 Pokemon, instead of only 30. Well, actually, 150 first got slipped in without him knowing about it, but that's a whole different story. Miyamoto had a lot of irons in the fire, but finishing Mario 64 in time for the N64's release date was his top priority. Unfortunately, though, he was spread so thin that he just couldn't meet the deadline. But President Yamauchi had so much faith in Miyamoto that he delayed the console's launch just for him, telling the press, "Game creators can finish games quickly if they compromise, but gamers have sharp eyes. They soon know if the games are compromised. Miyamoto asked for 2 more months, and I gave them to him unconditionally." Yamauchi's faith was well placed. When Mario 64 finally launched, it was met with critical and commercial success, becoming the N64's best-selling game of all time at 11 million copies sold. In 2021, a sealed copy sold at an auction for a blistering $1.5 million, a testament to the game's lasting legacy. Even if, there might have been some money laundering involved with that one, but Just like the NES era a decade prior, after revolutionizing the platformer genre with a brand new Mario, it was time to switch gears and breathe new life into the action-adventure genre with a brand new Zelda. Now, critics loved Mario 64, but there was one complaint that kept bubbling to the surface again and again: the camera. So initially, EAD considered making Link's Leap into 3D a first-person adventure that Miyamoto compared to GoldenEye. But one day his team went to a ninja show for inspiration, and they saw a samurai surrounded on all sides by enemies. Watching with amazement as the samurai switched focus to fight them one at a time, a light bulb went off in their heads, and they came up with a system that supplemented camera control they called Z-targeting. The first of its kind and a key component in what's been lauded as one of the greatest games of all time. There was also Star Fox 64, F-Zero X, and countless other hits. He oversaw some of the 90s most iconic titles, but unfortunately, the decade came to a close with some of his biggest misses. Nintendo originally announced the N64's disk drive add-on, the 64DD, would launch in late 1996, but after seemingly endless delays, it didn't release until late 1999. And it only managed to sell a humiliating 15,000 units. Miyamoto sank tons of time into games that never saw the light of day, like a breeding simulator called Cabbage. Cabbage was a collaborative effort with Satoru Iwata, Shigeru Itoi of the Mother series, and CEO of the Pokemon Company, Tsunekazu Ishihara. Players could raise a virtual pet on the 64DD, transfer it onto a Game Boy where it was kind of like a Tamagotchi, and then import it to the virtual world of a friend who had their own 64DD. Cabbage spent at least 4 years in development, and they even were planning on adding expansion content with additional discs. But unfortunately, it was abandoned after the disc drive's abysmal launch. Miyamoto also spent a lot of time producing the Mario Artist series, basically kid-friendly console Photoshop. IGN called it the 64DD's killer app, and said it was, quote, so easy to use that anyone could figure it out after a few minutes. Miyamoto had high hopes for Mario Artist, but half the series ended up getting cancelled before completion, and the half that did release only sold a few thousand copies. Making matters worse, Miyamoto was so focused on Mario Artist that he had to deprioritize Mario 128's development, the long-awaited sequel to Mario 64 that, just like Cabbage, never made it to market. With the 5th console generation coming to a close, industry belligerents started ramping up for the next console war, GameCube versus PlayStation 2. And Miyamoto had an ace up his sleeve, an aggressively original game that he was calling, quote, the next Mario. He'd taken unused elements from Mario 128 and produced what he believed would be the next big thing in video games, a revolution for the next generation, just as he'd delivered so many times before. Releasing a few weeks after the GameCube's launch, Pikmin was met with adoration from critics and fans alike. IGN gave it a 91, Game Informer a 93, and Nintendo Power gave it a perfect 100. But for some reason, people just weren't buying it. It barely scratched 1 million copies sold, and its sequel sold even less, despite earning even higher review scores. Simply put, the series was a flop by Miyamoto standards. Super Mario Sunshine suffered a similar fate too. It only sold half the numbers of its predecessor, and when the next Zelda game released released a year later, it sold so poorly that its director, Eiji Aonuma, said it, quote, could mean the end of the franchise. The GameCube itself wasn't doing too hot either. It was getting outsold 7-1 by the rivals at Sony. The press began to wonder if Nintendo would succumb to the same fate Sega suffered a few years earlier, exiting the console business to focus exclusively on software. Financially, it was the darkest period in Nintendo's history since Miyamoto's rapid ascent 2 decades prior. But for Miyamoto and Nintendo both, it was darkest before the dawn. He was in his 50s now, and unlike his younger days, he wasn't just making games for children around the world. Now his own kids were old enough to play them, and he took a hard stance on how much they could play. He told his kids that the home consoles belonged to him. He owned them, and he'd only allow them to rent the consoles for a few hours at a time. Watching them play his games, and sometimes even letting them playtest his prototypes, he started to think about how he could appeal to less experienced gamers, and a wider audience in general. He told his friend Shigesato Itoy, I want to make something where 80 to 90% of consumers can make it to the end, even if that means we have to risk that players who make it that far lose some of that feeling of challenge or achievement. Miyamoto was worried that modern games were only drawing in people who were already gamers, when what he really wanted to do was make gamers out of ordinary people. In other words, if Nintendo's slice of the gaming pie was getting smaller, then the pie itself needed to get a whole lot bigger. As Nintendo began working on their next console, the Wii, Miyamoto took charge of its revolutionary controller and played a key role in the pack-in title that eventually became Wii Sports. Now approaching 60, he was weighing himself daily, exercising, and making charts to track his performance, a routine he decided to make into a game called Wii Fit, which exploded in popularity with casuals and non-gamers, and it became a huge system seller. Nintendo released their new handheld, the DS, around the same time, so Miyamoto targeted casuals with another aspect of his personal life. He's actually a semi-professional dog breeder, and his family pet was a sheepdog named Piku. So he combined it with ideas from the long-abandoned Cabbage game to make Nintendogs, which went on to become the second best-selling DS game. The number 1 selling game, of course, was the New Super Mario Bros. Reboot. There was one Miyamoto hobby that didn't garner rave reviews and a giant pile of money, but we won't dwell on it. Both the DS and the Wii were incredibly successful at tapping into the casual market that Miyamoto was targeting, though he never forgot his core audience. The Wii's biggest launch title, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, garnered review scores of around 96% and more than doubled the sales of Wind Waker. It even managed to outsell Ocarina of Time, an achievement that possibly saved the series from extinction. Not to be outdone, Super Mario Galaxy burst onto the scene a year later with review scores of 97%, doubling Sunshine sales and stealing the crown from Mario 64. Miyamoto was back on top, but he had a lot more help this generation than he had previously. By now, he'd been promoted to senior managing director, more like a supervisor than a hands-on director. He became infamous for what his colleagues described as flipping the tea table. If he didn't like what he was seeing mid or even late development, he'd order his subordinates to completely rework major concepts, sometimes so drastically that games could get delayed a year or more. Miyamoto's table flipping instilled a lot of anxiety in his developers, but with sales records breaking left and right, it was hard to argue with the results. However, all good things must come to an end, and by the Wii era's closing, it seemed Miyamoto already had one foot in retirement. In 2011, he went on Japanese TV revealing he wasn't long from parting the industry, saying, "Honestly, I think seriously about what to do as I step away. When I want, I'm able to step back and pretend I'm not there, making sure not to butt in with my opinion, for instance. Although sometimes I can't help myself. I think the closer I get to 60, the easier it's been for me to pull away. Of course, I still have 5 years left." A month later, the then 59-year-old Miyamoto told Wired, "Inside our office, I've been recently declaring, I'm gonna retire. I'm not saying that I'm going to retire from game development altogether. What I mean by retiring is retiring from my current position." The next day, Nintendo stock plunged $500 million, prompting the company to release a statement saying, actually, Miyamoto wasn't going anywhere, and his role wasn't changing one iota either. But despite their assurances, it was clear to anybody paying attention that wasn't entirely true. His Mario co-director, Takashi Tezuka, had started a Mario Cram School to teach Nintendo's younger generation of developers how to make Mario games. And in the years that followed, Miyamoto continued to make no secret of the fact that he was passing the torch on both hardware and software as he phased himself out of the equation. His name still graced the credits of Mario 3D World, A Link Between Worlds, Star Fox Guard, and many more first-party games as a general producer, but he wasn't as intimately involved as he was in his younger days. In 2015, his title was changed to Fellow at Nintendo, and much of his attention turned to other projects, like a Super Mario movie, the Super Nintendo World theme park, and spending more time with his family, playing the guitar, and walking his dogs. Miyamoto celebrated his 71st birthday last year, and there's no question he's left a huge legacy since Donkey Kong. The Japanese government honored him with the Person of Cultural Merit Award, GDC gave him the Lifetime Achievement Award, and the French government made him a knight. He recently told The New Yorker, "It's taken about 10 years, but I feel that the younger generation here is now fully capable. We are moving toward a position that will ensure the spirit of Nintendo is passed down successfully. I'm not concerned about that anymore." We hope he's right, and whatever the future holds for you, Mr. Miyamoto, we wish you all the best. You've left a huge impact on Nintendo, the industry, and an entire generation of people that play video games, us included. Running around Bob-omb Battlefield, catching all 151 Pokemon, sailing the Great Sea. Your imagination defined our childhoods, and now that we're all grown up, it has defined our careers. So long, Miyamoto-san, and thanks for all the games.
Masahiro Sakurai has said that he believes that specialists create the world. By becoming experts in their fields, those who have chosen a certain path will continue to enrich the lives of many other people, including experts in other fields. This ideology drives Sakurai in his creative process, and led him to arguably change the world of gaming. This is how a kid saving his allowance to pay for video games became the man who created one of gaming's most iconic mascots, and one of the industry's biggest franchises. This is Masahiro Sakurai. Masahiro Sakurai was born on August 3, 1970, in Musashimurayama, Tokyo. Very little is known about Sakurai's family, as he rarely talks about them publicly. He has mentioned that his parents didn't support his pursuit of game design at first, but he later found their home full of merchandise from his games after they found success. Sakurai was first introduced to video games around the age of 4 or 5, when he played games like Breakout and Pong in arcades. He was fascinated by the idea of pressing buttons and seeing action on screen. After this, Sakurai would use his allowance to buy video games to further what he called his research, and in middle school Sakurai would get a Famicom Basic and begin programming his own games. In his later teenage years, Sakurai would develop an internal struggle that forced him to reflect on what he wanted to do and how he wanted to achieve it. He briefly attended a technical school to learn about electrical engineering, before deciding that he actually wanted to work on video games. He dropped out of the technical school in favor of a traditional high school, where he would study for exams and work a part-time job to afford more games for his personal research. He later concluded that the best way to work with video games was just to do it. In November of 1986, the developer HAL Laboratory released Gull Force, a game that would set Masahiro Sakurai on the path towards his life's work. Sakurai played the game and decided that he wanted to work for the company responsible for it after seeing the credits. Just 3 years later, he would be working for HAL. Early in his employment, one of HAL's head developers named Satoru Iwata decided that they should make a game that would be fun for both beginners and seasoned gamers. Iwata let anyone in the company pitch him ideas, including Sakurai, who approached Iwata with an idea called Twinkle Popo. Iwata liked the pitch, and the game would eventually become Kirby's Dream Land. This would be both the first game Sakurai was credited for and his debut as a director. Kirby's Dream Land was designed to appeal to hardcore and casual players, being simple to complete but difficult to master. Kirby's ability to fly across the stage was an option for players who might have struggled with the game's obstacles, meaning that anyone could clear the game regardless of their skill. Sakurai explained his reasoning for this, saying, "Being able to take multiple hits from enemies yet dying immediately upon falling in a hole didn't mix well in my mind. So I blew Kirby up like a balloon so he could fly at any time." Originally, Kirby was called Popopo, and his design was simple and round. This was always intended to be nothing more than a placeholder. However, late in development, Sakurai and Iwata decided that having a character that could be easily drawn might have wide appeal. They decided to finalize Popopo's simple design, and Sakurai chose to color the character pink. His name was later changed to Twinkle Popo and sent off to Nintendo of America for feedback. The Americans sent back a list of other name ideas to use, and amongst them was Kirby. Though it is commonly thought that this name was borrowed from John Kirby, a lawyer who helped defend Nintendo against Universal Studios over the name Donkey Kong, it is unknown if this is the actual origin of the name. Sakurai and Hal liked the general harshness of the word Kirby when contrasted with the character's soft design. So, this name stuck. Kirby's Dream Land had a difficult development because it used a modified twin Famicom system with a trackball to enter code. However, upon its release for the Game Boy, Kirby was an instant success and Sakurai was tasked to work on a sequel to the game. This time, the game would be set for the Famicom and the Nintendo Entertainment System, and was intended to be one of the last first-party games for the console. One of the biggest pieces of feedbacks from critics and fans was that Kirby's Dream Land was too easy and too short. In response to this, and also because their new game was to be one of the final NES games, Sakurai decided that they could make the game more difficult. However, to keep it accessible and give the player more options, Sakurai added the copy system to the game, allowing for Kirby to copy his opponent's abilities and use them. This, in turn, gave the player more variety in how they wanted to overcome the game's platforming and defeat enemies. Sakurai would later call this style of game design Kirbyism. Essentially, Sakurai seeks to keep his games wide in terms of accessibility, but deep in terms of offering challenge and replayability. He always seeks to give players value in making his games, a philosophy that would drive most of his future titles. The next project that Sakurai would direct would be another Kirby game for the Super Nintendo called Kirby Superstar. For this title, Sakurai decided he wanted to use the increased production value offered by the Super Nintendo and packed in several different types of games into Superstar. Shigeru Miyamoto also tasked Sakurai with making a side-scrolling action game playable by two people at the same time, which led to the creation of the Helper system. This would become a staple in the Kirby series since its introduction in Superstar. Around this time, Sakurai's personal life also began to change. A woman named Michiko Takahashi joined HAL and worked on Kirby's Star Stacker. She later joined Sakurai in the development of his next project, where she created several levels and designed the menu system. At some point, Sakurai and Takahashi began dating, and would go on to be married in June of 2008. For his next project, Sakurai was told to work on something new and different from Kirby. For this new game, Sakurai would create two prototypes, one for an action-adventure game and a second for a fighting game simply called Ryuo, the fighting game. Ryuo was originally developed by just Sakurai himself and Satoru Iwata, who had since become the president of HAL. The game was different from traditional fighters in that players did not try to get their opponent's health to zero. Instead, as a character was hit, they accumulated damage, which made it easier for them to get knocked off of the stage. Sakurai decided to include several ideas that he'd introduced with Kirby, most notably the idea of blast zones at the edge of stages. Iwata and Sakurai also concluded that they needed a roster of characters that players would easily connect with, and decided to make a prototype featuring some of Nintendo's most popular characters. When the prototype was first shown to Shigeru Miyamoto, he rejected it, but Iwata hid this from Sakurai and the two continued to work on the game. When the pair later presented a more complete vision for the game, Miyamoto finally approved of it, and Super Smash Bros. Was born. Despite the rough start of development, Sakurai always felt like the game could be a success. He said, "We were confident that it was an idea that a lot of people would endorse, and most importantly, we were confident that there was a large audience that was waiting for this kind of game. With a roster including some of Nintendo's most iconic characters and a simple battle mechanic, Smash Bros. Would prove to be an instant hit." After the game's launch, Sakurai started posting on a blog he called the Smash Dojo, which gave players hints and tips about the new fighting game. Sakurai also used the platform to answer various fan questions, and even gave players tips on how to complete GoldenEye 007. Just 3 months after the release of Super Smash Bros. In the US in April of 1999, Sakurai would complete his initial draft of its sequel on Nintendo's next console and begin prototyping. As Sakurai later said, "The previous game did well enough that Nintendo knew what I wanted in advance, and I wanted a lot." Sakurai wanted everything about this game to be bigger and better than its predecessor, even down to its music. This was the first game in the series to see an orchestrated score, which Sakurai personally pushed for. He felt so strongly about this that he was willing to use his own money to fund it if Nintendo were unwilling to. In May of 2001, Super Smash Bros. Melee was officially shown to the public at E3, and its first tournament would be held later that same year at Space World 2001. Melee's development was particularly difficult on Sakurai. He noted that he only took a few days off over its 13-month development cycle, and was even hospitalized at one point. This effort was not in vain though, as Melee would break both critical and commercial expectations, and has remained a staple in the fighting game community since its release. Around this same time, a Kirby animated series called Kirby Right Back At You was airing, produced by Warpstar Incorporated, a joint project between HAL and Nintendo. Sakurai was heavily involved with the animation's production, often giving feedback on ideas and sketches for the show. Famously, Sakurai restricted the animators with Kirby's inability to speak, which posed many challenges for the team. On the game design side, Sakurai had also moved on and begun development of Kirby Air Ride, a project that had its roots on the Nintendo 64. Though Sakurai has stated that the N64 and GameCube iterations of Air Ride were different and only had a name in common. During this period, Sakurai began to grow tired of his current role and work as a game designer, and by the end of development on Kirby Air Ride had decided to leave HAL and become a free agent. Kirby Right Back At You ended in September of 2003, just a month after Sakurai's departure from HAL. In his Famitsu column, Sakurai explained his decision. I felt that in the current organization that it would be difficult to continue making games. I left because I felt there would be appeal in working with a variety of other content creators. Sakurai grew tired of trying to climb the corporate ladder, and just wanted to focus on making games for his customers instead of for a company or corporation. Additionally, in an interview posted on Project Sora, Sakurai stated that he felt limited working with the same people over and over and wanted to work with different people on new projects. Still, before leaving HAL, Sakurai consulted with Satoru Iwata, his friend and mentor who had since become the president of Nintendo. Iwata gave Sakurai his blessing, and told Sakurai that if Nintendo were to ever make another Smash game, they may contact Sakurai to consult him. After leaving HAL, Sakurai was brought on to help with one final Kirby game, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, developed by Capcom's subsidiary Flagship. The title was built on the same technology as Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, a game that Sakurai co-directed with Shinichi Shimomura. Sakurai is credited as a special advisor on The Amazing Mirror, and would be the final time he'd work directly on a game starring his pink creation. Now a freelancer, Sakurai began to focus working on a variety of different projects. He continued to publish a bi-weekly column in Famitsu magazine titled Think About the Video Games, where he expressed his thoughts on topics relating to the industry. In 2004, Sakurai gave a talk at the Game Developers Conference called Risk and Return, where he talked about how games need both risk and reward to entertain players. In 2005, Sakurai created a puzzle game called Meteos with Tetsuya Mizuguchi for the Nintendo DS. In that same year, he began designing Sudate Mushi King, a Tamagotchi-like game for Sega's Mushi King series. Though he enjoyed working on these various titles and several other developers approached Sakurai with proposals, one game caught Sakurai's interest more than any other. At an E3 pre-party in 2005, Sakurai was shocked to learn that Iwata had plans for another Smash Bros. Game on the yet-to-be-released Nintendo Wii. Shortly afterwards, Iwata and Sakurai met in a hotel room, where Iwata asked Sakurai to come back and help with the new title. Sakurai agreed, explaining, "If I left someone else in charge, the customers and the people who originally worked on Smash might be disappointed. If that happened, I would be deeply hurt. I couldn't ignore these demands as the original author." He formed a new independent company called Sora Limited, which helped him facilitate contracts, payments, and copyrights. However, since Sakurai was not outright employed by Nintendo or any other company, his position is unique in the industry. It also means that whenever Sakurai is brought back to work on a new Smash Bros. Game, Nintendo must go through a lengthy legal process just to allow him to work on it. With Miyamoto's advice, Nintendo and Sakurai recruited personnel from a developer called Game Arts, who had impressed Sakurai with their dedication to playing Melee and their work on Grandia 3. A new office was founded in Tokyo so that Sakurai could work on the game, instead of in Kyoto at Nintendo's main headquarters. Though HAL was not directly involved with the development of this new Smash Bros., they did offer Sakurai and his new team the same studio space and programs that they'd used to develop Melee. Sakurai was grateful for this gesture as it made development much more efficient. For this new Smash Bros. Game, Sakurai wanted to add an ambitious single-player campaign. The story was to be so big that Sakurai envisioned the game being developed by two different studios, though these plans fell through when he couldn't find a company he could trust to handle it. Super Smash Bros. Brawl was announced at E3 2006, and shocked fans by including third-party characters like Konami's Solid Snake and Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog. When Brawl was released in early 2008, it was a bigger hit than even Melee, and has since sold 13.27 million copies. In February of 2009, after completing development on Brawl, Sakurai and some of his peers founded Project Sora, an ad hoc development studio in Tokyo. The original intent of Project Sora was to gather a team of developers, create a new portable game for Nintendo's next-generation handheld, and then eventually work on a new Super Smash Bros. Game. Under Sakurai's direction, Project Sora would go on to develop Kid Icarus Uprising, using redesigns of the Kid Icarus characters from Brawl. However, after completing Uprising, the team was disbanded and Project Sora dissolved. Sakurai later explained in an interview that it was difficult on a human resources level to maintain the company because it had recruited so many people from different studios. Though Project Sora was disbanded, the idea of making another Smash Bros. Game remained. Sakurai and Iwata decided that they should make two versions of the new game, one for the Wii U and one for the 3DS. This was announced at Nintendo's E3 presentation in 2011, but development did not begin until after Sakurai completed Kid Icarus Uprising in March of the following year. For the new games, Nintendo teamed up with Bandai Namco, who had staff members who had experience in fighting game franchises like Tekken and Soul Calibur. The cast for the new game was greatly expanded, and included more iconic third-party newcomers like Capcom's Mega Man and Bandai Namco's Pac-Man. Sakurai also let other staff members help him with balancing the game, hopefully lessening the stress on him during development. Despite this, Sakurai suffered from calcific tendinitis in his right shoulder during production, which caused him great discomfort and pain. Regardless, he soldiered on, making adjustments to his toolset, such as using a trackball mouse instead of a normal mouse to ease the pain. Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS were released in September of 2014 to great success, selling more than 8.5 million copies combined. Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS were also the first games in the franchise to feature downloadable content, which opened the door for more surprise newcomers like Square Enix's Cloud from Final Fantasy VII and Platinum Games' Bayonetta. However, during this period, tragedy would strike at Nintendo. On July 11, 2015, Nintendo's president, Satoru Iwata, passed away from complications of a tumor in his bile duct. The loss of his friend and mentor devastated Sakurai, who later said in his column, "I wrote about my point of view, that when a person dies, that's simply a single character disappearing, but to that person, their entire world disappears." However, even for others, Mr. Iwata had a presence that was too great to simply call him a character in their story, I think. After the completion of the development of DLC for Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, Sakurai announced that he was taking a short break, but that his next project had already been decided. Years later, this project was revealed to be Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for the Nintendo Switch, a game that Sakurai truly wanted to live up to its name. He decided that this game should be the ultimate Smash Bros. Experience, and that every veteran fighter should return alongside several highly requested newcomers, and the most popular items and stages from previous games. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was released on December 7th, 2018. Sakurai once said that developers should see things from the player's perspective. Don't limit the possibilities of gameplay. This philosophy, alongside his desire to exceed his own expectations, has undoubtedly made Sakurai a specialist in game development. Whether it's crafting new and fun ideas through titles like Kirby, Smash Bros. Or Meteos, or pushing the limits with his own sequels or reboots, Sakurai has always sought to deliver as much value as possible to the highest number of players. And for that, he has indeed changed the world of gaming. The truly passionate can make their thoughts infectious, inspiring others to love their ideas even if they don't know who came up with them. This is true of Satoshi Tajiri, a private man who's relatively unknown compared to other superstar developers. Despite this, Tajiri's excitement to share his love of games kickstarted a multi-billion-dollar series. This is how a kid wandering the rural countryside of Japan looking for bugs became the creator of the most popular multimedia franchise in history. This is Satoshi Tajiri. Satoshi Tajiri was born in Machida, a suburban part of Tokyo, on August 28, 1965. His father sold Nissan cars, while his mother stayed at home raising Tajiri and his younger sister. Tajiri was a curious child who loved to explore the forests around where he lived. There he found streams and abandoned air raid shelters, where he discovered new insects and animals. Tajiri was an insect fanatic and wanted to be an entomologist. He'd collect bugs so much that his friends called him the Bug Professor. He'd even leave big rocks near trees and come back after some time to see what new bugs had made their home under the stone. From a young age, Tajiri was interested in researching and showing his findings to classmates, so much so that one of his teachers blocked out time for him to present his findings to the class. Tajiri also began making newsletters for his classmates during his later years in elementary school. As time went on, his interest in collecting small creatures evolved past bugs, and he began catching and raising other animals like frogs and crawfish. Unfortunately, Tajiri would find his hobby unsustainable as Tokyo began to modernize. The rivers Tajiri played in when he was younger were filled in as several bridges and dams were built. A great deal of land in Tokyo was also being paved over, further blocking access to the nature he used to explore. Much of the local wildlife was driven away as the city developed, but Tajiri would find a new hobby to fill the void left behind. While he was in middle school, an arcade opened near Tajiri's home, where he was introduced to video games. Like many other Japanese people during this time, Tajiri and his friends took a particular liking to Space Invaders. He found he had a particular knack for playing video games, claiming many of the top scores at the local arcade. Tajiri began to garner a reputation for being able to play games for a long time on very little pocket change, earning him the nickname the Storm of the Arcade. Much of Tajiri's desire to study and share information crossed over into gaming, and he began studying how the games worked. Feeling that others might want to use his knowledge to improve their own scores, Tajiri began writing tips and strategy guides for various titles. He played games so often during this time that one arcade just gave him a Space Invaders cabinet. Tajiri's interest in games grew beyond just playing them and into the early stages of game development. As a young child, he entered a contest held by Universal Entertainment with an idea called the Midnight Crows. Tajiri's vision for the title started with a simple black screen with crows hidden in the darkness. Occasionally, the crows would open their eyes, allowing the players to locate and shoot at them. Tajiri's idea was a hit and was recognized by Universal's contest. In junior high school, he dreamed of creating a sequel to Space Invaders, developing the idea into a concept called Spring Strangers. Tajiri submitted his idea to a contest held by Sega, and ended up winning the grand prize. Sega invited the young Tajiri to their headquarters to accept the award, the first time the burgeoning developer would be welcomed at a game company. This event would have a huge impact on the young Tajiri. However, this passion for video games took its toll on Tajiri's schoolwork, as he often skipped class to go to the arcade and play new games. He almost didn't graduate high school and had no aspirations of attending university, something seen as a requirement in Japanese culture to have a respectable career. Despite giving half the money he'd won from Sega's contest to his parents, they felt that their son was becoming a delinquent because of this hobby. His father knew he was interested in electronics, as Tajiri had saved to buy a PC 8000 so he could learn how to code games. Because of this, Tajiri's father tried to get him a job as an electric utility repair person at the Tokyo Electric Power Company, though Tajiri refused the offer. He did eventually complete a 2-year major in electronics and computer science at the Tokyo National College of Technology. In the early 1980s, Tajiri noticed there was little multimedia about video games despite the popularity of titles like Donkey Kong and Space Invaders, and he decided that he could use his love of collecting and distributing information to his advantage. In 1982, Tajiri published the first issue of a fanzine he called Game Freak, featuring strategy guides on completing games, articles about new arcade releases, lists of Easter eggs to find, and tips on how to get the highest scores possible. Every issue was handwritten and photocopied, then stapled together by Tajiri. The first cover of Game Freak featured Dig Dug, which Tajiri drew himself. However, Tajiri had very little artistic talent, and did his best to draw the pixels on graph paper using the game as reference. Game Freak was first sold at local bookstores for 200 yen per issue, which is roughly $2.35 in today's money. Though this seemed like a somewhat high price for an unofficial, handwritten, photocopied magazine, Tajiri was confident it could be successful. Tajiri believed there was a genuine interest in that content, and his instincts were spot on. Game Freak quickly found modest success, and was soon distributed by mail order. Demand was so high that Tajiri enlisted his mother and sister to help stuff envelopes for Game Freak orders received from all over Japan. In 1983, Namco released the arcade shoot-'em-up Xevious, which caught the attention of Tajiri. He quickly became hooked on the title and decided to make an issue of Game Freak dedicated to the game. This special issue ended up being the most successful Game Freak to date, selling more than 10,000 copies. At just age 18, Tajiri's small startup was so successful he had to shift away from handwriting to typing them up, and he began collaborating with contributors. The Xevious issue of Game Freak also opened up new opportunities for Tajiri. Namco hired a player who achieved 10 million points in Xevious to create an official guidebook for the title, but the player wasn't able to because they were busy with school exams. Instead, the player contacted Tajiri and invited him to work on the project. With Tajiri's aid, the guide became successful, doubling expectations and selling 15,000 copies. Another notable collaborator brought in by the success of Game Freak was an artist named Ken Sugimori. Like Tajiri, Sugimori had no interest in attending university and wanted to focus on becoming an illustrator. This decision angered Sugimori's family, who kicked him out for his artistic ambition. At some point, Sugimori saw a Game Freak in a doujinshi shop and reached out, offering to draw for the magazine. He moved to live closer to Tajiri, beginning a long-lasting friendship that would one day define the artistic direction of Game Freak's most popular creation. As Game Freak continued to grow in popularity and Tajiri played more games, it became increasingly obvious to him which games were good and which were bad. To help fix this perceived issue, Tajiri decided that Game Freak should shift from just talking about video games and into full development. In the latter half of 1983, Nintendo released the Famicom in Japan, and Tajiri was determined to make games for the device. He studied the Famicom's programming language, Family Basic, and bought the development hardware necessary to enter production. At one point, he even took a Famicom apart to study how it worked. However, Tajiri and Game Freak quickly ran into an issue. In order to release games for the Famicom, they needed a contract with Nintendo. To solve this problem, Game Freak decided to pitch their ideas to companies who were already licensed partners of Nintendo instead of seeking a direct contract themselves. Tajiri began brainstorming ideas, and was heavily influenced by Namco's game design principles. He'd noticed that each of Namco's games were built upon a verb. Dig Dug was about digging, while Pac-Man was about eating. Tajiri searched for his own verb for Game Freak's first title, and eventually landed on flipping, which would become the basis for Quinty. This title saw players flipping over tiles on a board, using powers found underneath to push enemies to the walls of the game board. Tajiri and Game Freak pitched Quinty to Namco, who picked it up and published it for the Famicom. It was later localized for Western audiences as Mindel Palace, with a fantasy aesthetic replacing Sugimori's chibi art. Worldwide, Quinty would sell over 200,000 copies, giving Game Freak enough resources to officially establish themselves as a company on April 26, 1989. Interestingly, the biggest inspiration for Tajiri and the idea that would define the next step of his career came from an unexpected place: frustration. After Dragon Quest II's release in 1987, both Tajiri and Sugimori played the RPG and frequently compared their progress. During his playthrough, Sugimori managed to get 2 Madcaps, a rare item that dropped randomly during encounters. This annoyed Tajiri as he'd yet to have a single Madcap drop. In 1989, Nintendo released the Game Boy handheld console, which had the capability to connect with other Game Boys via a link cable peripheral for competitive multiplayer. However, after seeing the link cable, Tajiri realized that players would be able to work cooperatively as well, potentially trading items such as the Madcap to a friend who lacked their own, or working together to fight bosses. Additionally, after seeing Final Fantasy Legend release on the Game Boy, Tajiri realized that not every game on the system had to be a fast-paced action game. Thinking back to Namco's verb-based game design principles, Tajiri began brainstorming a game centered on exchanging, imagining small creatures crawling back and forth between Game Boys along the link cable. Tajiri dreamed up an idea revolving around the collection, trading, and battling of capsule monsters. Game Freak pitched this idea to Nintendo, who eventually picked it up and agreed to publish it. The pitch particularly caught the attention of Shigeru Miyamoto, who served as a mentor for Tajiri as the idea gestated. However, the Capsule Monsters game ended up taking 6 years to make, an extraordinarily long development cycle at the time, and Game Freak would need to work on several smaller projects to fund the studio. The first of these games was Smart Ball, a title written, designed, and directed by Tajiri. The game was published by Sony for the SNES, commissioned to show the Super Nintendo's sound trip, which Sony contributed to. As a platformer that sees players take control of a character named Jerry Bean, Smart Ball was a modest success that didn't stand out amongst the early titles of the SNES. Nevertheless, a sequel was planned at one point, but cancelled after Nintendo and Sony had a falling out over contract disputes for a CD-based SNES add-on which ultimately became the PlayStation. Afterwards, Tajiri showed his Capsule Monster idea to mother creator Shigesato Itoi, though Itoi felt that Game Freak still needed more experience before taking on such a big idea. Itoi referred Tajiri to Game Boy creator Gunpei Yokoi, who was looking for a team to make a Yoshi game for the handheld. The title had a strict 6-month deadline, and forced both Tajiri and Game Freak to learn a great deal about game development quickly. Under Tajiri's direction, Yoshi was completed on time with a somewhat mixed reception, though it impressed Nintendo enough to lend Game Freak the Mario IP. Tajiri then directed the Japan-exclusive puzzle game Mario and Wario, which saw players use the SNES mouse to guide Mario through levels. In 1995, despite their close relationship with Nintendo, Tajiri and Sugimori co-directed an action platformer titled Pulseman for the publisher's main rival, Sega. Another modest success, a few of Pulseman's ideas would live on as attacks in future Game Freak titles. Tajiri compared working as contractors on games like this to doing homework, just wanting to get them done as quickly as possible to the best of their ability so they could work on projects they were passionate about. During this period, Tajiri also put his experience in writing magazines to work, briefly working as a freelancer for various publications like Famicom Hishoban, Family Computer Magazine, Famitsu, and Playboy Weekly, though this publication had no relation to the American adult magazine. Despite these numerous contracts, development on Tajiri's Capsule Monsters idea was sluggish and nearly bankrupted Game Freak. Tajiri frequently lacked the funds to pay his employees, and 5 staff members quit as a result. Tajiri never paid himself during this time and had to live off his parents' income to survive. However, Game Freak didn't give up on the idea, and were eventually able to complete development with the support of Nintendo and extra investments from Ape Incorporated, now known as Creatures Incorporated. Tajiri often stayed awake for more than 24 hours to help come up with ideas for the game, before sleeping another 12 and starting the process over. The concepts of Capsule Monsters evolved quite a bit since Tajiri first conceived of the game. The idea of collecting, battling, and trading monsters remained, but Tajiri also wanted to include an entire world for players to explore, inspired by his childhood experiences in rural Tokyo. So much of Tajiri was in the title that he decided the default name of the main protagonist should be Satoshi. Tajiri has even gone as far as to call the player character him when he was a kid. Shigeru was chosen as the default name for the player's rival, honoring the advice and guidance Tajiri was given by Shigeru Miyamoto. Tajiri also insisted the monsters faint after losing a battle instead of dying, because he thought there was already enough violence in the world and didn't want kids to associate losing a game with death. Upon hearing the concept of trading and battling across consoles, Miyamoto suggested that multiple versions of the game be released with different monsters on each, to encourage trading between players, a tradition that every entry in the series would follow. Game Freak ran into trademark issues with the name Capsule Monsters, trying alternatives like Capumon before settling on Pocket Monsters. This name was eventually shortened further when it was localized for the West, becoming Pokemon. Development on Pokemon Red and Green was finally completed after 6 years, with the games releasing in Japan on February 27, 1996. However, Nintendo and Game Freak did not have high expectations for them. The Game Boy was very far into its lifespan, and with the release of the Nintendo 64, both companies felt that gamers had moved on from the handheld. Several publications didn't cover the release of Red and Green for similar reasons, and Tajiri had even worried that the general lack of interest in the titles would lead Nintendo to reject them. However, they hadn't taken into account how many young Japanese children were still playing the Game Boy because it was cheaper than new hardware. Over the next few months, sales of Pokemon Red and Green never dropped off, and many gamers bought both versions so they could capture every Pokemon on their own. Surprised by the consistent sales, Tajiri experimented with ways to keep interest in the games alive. Nintendo and Game Freak partnered with the publishing company Shogakukan, who made a manga adaptation of the series. Media Factory was then commissioned to create the first version of the Pokemon trading card game in October of 1996, with some promotional cards being given away with issues of the manga. After development was completed on Red and Green, but before they were sent to be printed on cartridges, programmer Shigeki Morimoto secretly added a final Pokemon as a prank. Morimoto only ever intended for this Pokemon, the legendary Mew, to be obtainable by Game Freak's staff. Rumors of this 151st Pokemon began to spread, and Tajiri decided to capitalize on them. In Koro Koro magazine, Tajiri confirmed the existence of Mew and distributed playing cards featuring the Pokemon. Interest in the Pokemon spiked, and Game Freak quickly organized a contest to distribute 151 Mews to lucky winners. Tajiri believes the secrecy and inability to capture Mew through traditional means created positive word of mouth and helped to virally market these early Pokemon games. By the end of 1997, Pokemon Red and Green had sold more than 4.6 million copies in Japan alone. The trading card game was a hit, an anime adaptation began airing, and a third, updated blue version had also been released. Despite fears that Western audiences wouldn't find the series as compelling, localized versions of Pokemon Red and Blue were released in 1998, with the anime and trading card game following closely afterwards. The series was equally successful in the West, with many outlets dubbing the phenomenon Pokemania. The series became so popular that several schools had to ban the trading cards because they were distracting students and causing fights. After the release of Red, Green, and Blue, Tajiri directed Pokemon Yellow, another version of the original title that took more cues from the anime adaptation. From there, he contributed designs to the action RPG tactics game Bushi Seiryu, released exclusively in Japan for the Super Famicom. However, the continued success of Pokemon drew Tajiri back to the franchise, and he once again took the director's chair for a pair of full-fledged sequels, Pokemon Gold and Silver. Upon their release in 1999, they continued the enormous success of the Pokemon franchise, going on to sell more than 23 million units to date. However, Pokemon Gold and Silver would be the final game Satoshi Tajiri directed himself, instead stepping up into a more managerial role at Game Freak. Tajiri is credited as an executive director for the third-generation Pokemon games, Ruby and Sapphire, with series composer Junichi Matsuda taking on the director's chair. A similar dynamic between Tajiri and Matsuda continued on Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, remakes of Tajiri's original games for the Game Boy Advance. Tajiri also served as scenario writer for the remakes, and approved all of the game's text himself. After Fire Red and Leaf Green, Tajiri fully stepped away from the day-to-day development of the games, though he has been credited as an executive producer on every title Game Freak has developed since, whether they were related to Pokemon or not. Since the early 2000s, Tajiri has stepped away from life in the public eye. He's rarely given interviews, instead focusing on his work at Game Freak. That said, a manga based on his life was released in 2018. Tajiri's passion for sharing information about what he loves and his desire to use that to develop good games literally changed several industries. Since Red and Green released on the Game Boy, Pokemon has become the highest-grossing multimedia franchise in history, with an estimated $95 billion of total revenue across its games, merchandise, animation, and even a Hollywood feature film. All of this from a kid who liked bugs, stapling together his self-published game magazine. There are few true auteurs in the gaming industry, and there is no other like Hideo Kojima. Despite entering the business with little knowledge of how development actually worked, Kojima's ideas and work ethic set him apart from his peers, allowing him to become one of the industry's most revered developers. This is how a poor kid with dreams of making movies would become one of the most celebrated game developers of all time. This is Hideo Kojima. Hideo Kojima was born the youngest of 3 children on August 24, 1963 in Setagaya, Tokyo. His family was somewhat wealthy and moved often when he was young, first to Osaka when he was just 4 years old. From there, his family would move to a small city named Shirasaki, and then to Kawanashi Higayo in the Kansai region. From an early age, Kojima loved several forms of art, particularly film. This love for movies was instilled by his parents, who were avid fans of Western, horror, and European cinema. It was a tradition in the household to stay up every night and watch a movie together. Kojima wasn't even allowed to go to sleep before the film ended. When he turned 10, Hideo's parents encouraged him to watch movies in theaters on his own, on the condition that he'd return with the film's brochure and discuss its themes and direction. Kojima frequently returned home from school before his parents finished work, and used television to escape his loneliness, watching anime, cooking shows, wildlife documentaries, and a variety of Western shows to pass the time. Using art to escape his isolation is a practice that has followed Kojima to this day. He's since said that when he travels, the first thing he does in his hotel is turn on the TV to deal with his feelings of loneliness. Watching films and television so frequently led Hideo to make his own art, inspiring dreams of becoming an illustrator or filmmaker. He eventually teamed up with a friend who owned an 8mm camera and started filming his own home movies. In high school, Kojima convinced his friends to collaborate on a zombie movie for their school's culture festival. Once completed, they attempted to sell tickets for the movie to attendees, hoping to raise funds to buy movies. The friends only managed to sell a few tickets by the end of the festival, not even enough to afford a single film. Unfortunately, Kojima would know tragedy early in his life, as his father passed away when Hideo was just 13 years old. Kojima himself also had frequent near-death experiences, being attacked by a dog, nearly drowning in a river, and almost getting run over by a train during his formative years. These experiences deeply affected Kojima, who described these near-death moments as the most intense memories of his childhood. The death of Hideo's father also left his family in a tough financial situation, which put pressure on him to enter a traditional career. Kojima explained, "The common belief in Japan at the time was that fine schools and proper education led to safe and well-paid jobs. This was the Japanese ideal, a regimentation which had consequences for everyone who tried not to follow the mainstream. My dreams of becoming a movie director came into conflict with this unwritten rule of society. It made life harder for me. It made me feel alone and rejected." Bowing to the pressure, Hideo attended a normal university and studied economics, but he refused to give up on his creative dreams. During this period, he hoped to write a novel that could easily be turned into a movie. He submitted short stories to numerous magazines, none of which were picked up. Kojima later concluded that this was because the magazines preferred brief, 100-page short stories, while his own writing frequently topped 400 pages. While in college, Kojima picked up the newly released Famicom, and would play a variety of games during his downtime at school, including shoot-em-ups like Xevious, and text adventures like the Portopia serial murder case. However, none would have the influence on Hideo that Super Mario Bros. Would. Kojima explained to G4, "The game that changed my life. The game of my destiny was Shigeru Miyamoto's Super Mario Bros. Till then, I pretty much had the notion that film and video games were separate entities, but then I realized that even in video games, I could do creative things just like they're done in the movies." Though he was already in his 4th year studying economics, Kojima decided to pursue a career in game design. At the time, the video game industry carried a social stigma in Japan, as many felt it was full of creatives that couldn't make it in filmmaking or writing. Though most of Kojima's friends, family, and professors discouraged him from switching careers, Hideo's mother was supportive and told him he could do whatever he wanted in life. This bolstered Kojima's confidence, and he began looking for work in the games industry. Kojima applied to a company called Konami, though it wasn't because of any specific game that they made. It was simply because Konami was listed on the Japanese Stock Exchange, the only games company to hold that accolade at the time. Not even Nintendo was listed during this period. Kojima saw this as a status symbol, and hoped that working for a publicly traded company would shed a more positive light on his career change. Kojima joined Konami in 1986 as a planner for their MSX team. He was initially disappointed in this assignment, as he wanted to be part of their Famicom team and felt that the MSX's color palette was too limiting. The crew at Konami were very much like Kojima, a group of creative hopefuls that saw video games as a second chance to make their dreams come true. Despite this, Kojima struggled to fit in at first. Planners were practically unheard of on the MSX team, and many of his colleagues considered Kojima dead weight because of his lack of technical skills. Kojima was given an assistant director position on Penguin Adventure, the sequel to 1983's Antarctic Adventure. He worked himself to the bone to prove himself, often refusing to take bathroom breaks and regularly dreaming about the game during his sleep. This hard work caught the attention of one of his superiors, who pulled him off Penguin Adventure and gave him the opportunity to direct his own title. Kojima spent half a year developing a concept called Lost World, but he quickly found his co-workers' lack of confidence wasn't wholly unfounded. He had little knowledge on how to create a game from scratch, how to schedule development, or how to deal with technical issues like memory constraints. After 6 months, little progress had been made, and Konami's higher-ups pulled the plug on Kojima's game. This left the young developer devastated, and worsened his co-workers' mocking. Konami gave Kojima one last opportunity, reassigning him to a military-themed game that was struggling to gain traction. Originally, the title had a heavy action focus, but the MSX2's hardware struggled to handle more than a handful of moving sprites at any one time. Hindered by this poor combat, Kojima brainstormed ways to make the gameplay more interesting. He thought back to the film The Great Escape, and how the characters in that story ran away instead of fighting. Deciding that escaping would be a more interesting objective, Kojima redesigned the title from the ground up as a stealth action game. When he told his coworkers, they thought he was crazy. Kojima told The Guardian, "I had such a hard time convincing people. I had so many things going against me at that time. The type of game I wanted to make didn't exist at that time. The odds were stacked against me, and it was very hard to earn the trust of the team." With his team resistant to his ideas, development stalled for months. At one point, Kojima was so frustrated that he considered quitting Konami, but he approached a senior official for advice. This official helped Hideo pitch his ideas to the team, and eventually helped win them over. Despite this, Kojima still came into conflict with his programming staff, who either had no idea how to implement his ideas or outright refused to work on them. The result of this struggle was Kojima's debut title, Metal Gear, which released on the MSX2 on July 17, 1987. Interestingly, though the box art for the title features traced art of the character Kyle Reese from The Terminator, the cinema-loving Kojima had nothing to do with this. Though Kojima originally wanted to join Konami's Famicom team, working on the MSX turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The computer's advanced hardware and hardcore audience let him design a more intricate game than he would have been able to on the Famicom. Metal Gear was eventually ported to the Famicom without Kojima or his team's consent, and Hideo only played it after picking it out of a bargain bin. He later criticized this version from cutting out content from the MSX version. Regardless, Metal Gear was a surprising critical and commercial success. Critics heaped praise on the title, and it quickly became one of the MSX's best-selling adventure games. The NES version would also go on to sell more than 1 million copies in the United States alone. Now with the hit under his belt, Kojima began work on another new game, this time a story-driven cyberpunk noir, called Snatcher. Again, he pulled from his love of film to find inspiration for this new title, borrowing ideas and imagery from sci-fi classics like Blade Runner and Akira. When Kojima pitched the idea of his cyberpunk adventure to Konami's trademark department over the phone, he became frustrated, as they did not understand what cyberpunk meant. Because of the nature of Snatcher's gameplay, Kojima only needed about half as many developers as a regular Famicom development team. Additionally, he recruited character designer Tomiharu Kinoshita to help capture a unique look for Snatcher's cast. Kojima treated Snatcher more like a film or anime, with enough story content to fill out 6 chapters. However, after a year and a half of development, the team only managed to finish 2 of these chapters before Konami demanded the development wrap so they could release the game. Kojima and his crew desperately tried to squeeze in a final chapter to wrap up its story, but Konami refused to budge on the deadline. Snatcher was released with a cliffhanger ending in late 1988 for both the PC-8801 and the MSX2. Though the title received critical acclaim, it did not sell well, and has since become a cult classic. In 1990, Kojima returned to complete the story in the Japan-exclusive RPG spin-off SD Snatcher for the MSX, but this took a backseat to another project that caught the developer's eye. After Metal Gear's success, Konami released a sequel called Snake's Revenge without Kojima's involvement. This game focused on action, and was developed for a Western audience, never releasing in Japan. On a train, Kojima coincidentally ran into an old coworker who was working on Snake's Revenge. He told Kojima that he didn't feel like Snake's Revenge was a true successor to Metal Gear, and that Hideo should make his own sequel. On his way home, Kojima began brainstorming what his version of a sequel would look like. He credits this chance encounter for his continued involvement with the Metal Gear series. By the next day, Kojima approached his superior with a plan for Metal Gear 2: Solid Snake, and though his superior was enthused, Konami's sales department had second thoughts. Despite great success in the North American market, Metal Gear had sold poorly in Japan. Kojima and his team traveled to Konami's headquarters and spent an entire day arguing with the sales team before the project was finally greenlit. The team obsessively pursued realism for the sequel, gathering as many books, movies, and model guns as possible for research. They even reached out to an ex-Green Beret for advice, and spent days playing war games in the mountains with infrared guns. Some members of the team even started showing up for work in combat fatigues. This dedication paid off, as when Metal Gear 2: Solid Snake was released for the MSX in July of 1990, it remained one of the console's best-selling games for 6 months straight. The title was originally released exclusively in Japan, but was eventually localized for international audiences in 2006. After this, Kojima returned to adventure games, overseeing a remake of Snatcher with full voice acting and a proper ending on the PC Engine Super CD-ROM Squared system. After his difficulties with programmers in the original Metal Gear, Kojima developed his own scripting engine so he could personally control everything in this new game. This tight grip over creative control would become a staple in each of Kojima's titles. The first game to implement this engine would be Kojima's next adventure title, Policenauts. This game was an extension of several themes Kojima explored with Snatcher, but also drew inspiration from the ethics of organ transplantations and brain death injuries, anti-Japanese sentiments from the film Rising Sun, and NASA documentation about the negative effects of space travel on the human body. The story was also inspired by buddy cop dramas like Starsky and Hutch, which were a particular favorite of Kojima's growing up. Harkening back to his love for film, Kojima borrowed many cinematography techniques for Policenauts. He perceived a lack of quality in the production values of other games, and wanted Policenauts to live up to the standards set by movies. Kojima also originally omitted subtitles from Policenauts to evoke a more cinematic feel. However, after receiving a letter from a hearing-impaired fan, he changed his mind and included text. After 4 years of development, Policenauts was released for the PC 9821 in 1994, and was later ported to multiple systems. However, one system in particular captured Kojima's imagination, and would shape his career for decades to come. While finishing up Policenauts, Kojima heard rumors of Sony's new console, the PlayStation. When he finally saw the device, he set out to create a new Metal Gear title, wanting it to be the best game on the PlayStation. Kojima had wanted to make a 3D Metal Gear game for the 3DO, but that console's discontinuation made it an easy decision to jump to the PlayStation's superior hardware. Around this time, Kojima also noticed the artwork of Yoji Shinkawa, a new hire at Konami. Kojima saw Shinkawa's potential and recruited him to help define Metal Gear Solid's art direction and character designs. The decision paid off, as Shinkawa's art became an integral part of the Metal Gear brand. Kojima felt that Metal Gear Solid needed to be as believable as possible, and turned to California's Hunting Beach SWAT department to learn as much as he could about modern tactics. He even personally bashed down doors with battering rams and handled machine guns for research. Much of the stealth gameplay that defined the first Metal Gear was updated for the new 3D environment, and it's possible for players to complete the game without killing any character except its main bosses. This gameplay was massively influential for the industry, and would be copied by countless titles afterwards. Kojima later said, "If the player isn't tricked into believing that the world is real, then there is no point in making the game. If you can captivate the player without having to trick them, then the game is worthwhile. That is the most tiring task." A lot of adjustments had to be made, down to the tiniest detail like individual desks. Further fulfilling Kojima's desire to bring games closer to movies, Metal Gear Solid featured an intro and opening credits sequence that resembled a film far more than other video games. Metal Gear Solid was released in September of 1998 to both critical and commercial success. Several publications praised its storytelling and gameplay, crediting the game for popularizing the stealth genre. Both IGN and users on the official PlayStation blog ranked Metal Gear Solid the best game on the PlayStation, and was also featured in the Smithsonian American Art Museum's exhibition on the art of video games in 2012. Worldwide, Metal Gear Solid has sold more than 6 million copies, a figure that surprised Kojima. He explained, "We were just making the game that we wanted to play. I don't think I had any expectations that it was going to be a big game. So when I heard that it was selling well in America, it didn't feel real." Ecstatic with the game's performance, Konami quickly commissioned a sequel that would utilize the more powerful hardware of the PlayStation 2. Kojima immediately began to work on the sequel, completing its design document in 1999 before moving into full development. Given the success of Metal Gear Solid, Kojima's team was given a budget of over $10 million for this new title, which Kojima put to good use by furthering its cinematic elements. The sequel featured several hours worth of cutscenes, incorporated motion capture technology, and touted a score co-composed by Hollywood veteran Cary Gregson Williams. It also had a twist worthy of a big-budget blockbuster. Despite the controversial twist, Metal Gear Solid 2's Sons of Liberty was again a critical and commercial hit, proving that Kojima's success with Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1 wasn't a fluke. Kojima rocketed to superstardom in the games industry, becoming a well-known name amongst journalists and consumers. During the 2000s, he continued producing a variety of titles, including multiple Metal Gear spin-offs, remakes, and re-releases, 2 titles in the mecha anime-inspired Zone of the Enders franchise, 2 action RPGs in the Tighe series, and the Castlevania reboot Lords of Shadow. In 2004, Kojima returned to Metal Gear with the intention of creating a prequel set in a completely different jungle environment. This title drew more from Cold War political fiction and the spy thriller franchise James Bond. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was released in November of 2004 for the PlayStation 2, and is considered one of the greatest games of all time. Though Kojima intended for Snake Eater to be the conclusion of the franchise, fan demand meant that a new installment went into development right away. Kojima originally declined the director's chair, but signed on as co-director alongside Shuya Murata after intense negative feedback from fans. This new title would also be the most cinematic game Kojima made to date, with several hours worth of cutscenes. In fact, the title holds the record for longest single cutscene in history, clocking in at 27 minutes. Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots was released on June 12, 2008 to universal acclaim, and has since sold over 6 million copies. Kojima's personal life and relationships also impacted his professional career during this time. He often played games with his son, including Super Smash Bros., though his son questioned why none of Kojima's characters were playable. When Kojima heard that his friend Masahiro Sakurai was developing a sequel to Smash Bros., he practically begged Sakurai to include Snake in the roster. Unfortunately, this was infeasible, as Sakurai was already too far into Melee's unusually short development cycle. However, Snake was later included as the first third-party character in the franchise with Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Kojima's mother also kept up with their son's games, though it would sometimes take her over a year to beat any one of them. When she finally beat Metal Gear Solid 3, she called Hideo and simply said, "It is finished." With more than 2 decades of success to his name, Kojima was promoted to Vice President and Corporate Officer of Konami Digital Entertainment in 2011. This new role allowed him to further spread his influence and experiment with viral marketing. Kojima ordered the creation of a new game engine dubbed the Fox Engine, which he claimed could be used to develop anything from first-person shooters to third-person adventure games. In August of 2012, Kojima showed off the Fox Engine with a demo titled Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes, a prologue for Metal Gear Solid 5. In December of that year, an unknown developer named Moby Dick Studio showed off an impressive in-game trailer for The Phantom Pain, directed by a man named Joachim Mogren. Many commentators noted the visual resemblance of The Phantom Pain to Ground Zeroes, and that Joachim was an anagram for Kojima, believing this to be an elaborate teaser for a new Metal Gear. Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, was revealed in March of 2013, and was later released in September of 2015, with a Hideo Kojima game proudly stamped above the logo. Once again, the title received universal acclaim and shipped more than 6 million copies as of December 2016. Kojima's love for multimedia again seeped into Metal Gear Solid 5, with actor Kiefer Sutherland replacing longtime voice actor David Hayter as Snake. Though the game had a budget of more than $80 million, a great deal of its content was cut, including several missions from later in the game and a more elaborate ending. Though there has been no official explanation, it is believed these cuts were due to undisclosed friction between Kojima and Konami's higher-ups. For years before the release of Metal Gear Solid 5, Kojima stated that he'd wanted to work on a horror game, and in particular to reboot the Silent Hill franchise. In August of 2014, a first-person horror game called PT was released on the PlayStation Store. The game, which featured a looping hallway and cryptic story, quickly caught the attention of internet content creators who wanted to solve its mystery. Despite its creators intending for PT to take over a week to complete, players cracked it within just a few hours of release, revealing it to be a playable teaser for a new Silent Hill game starring Norman Reedus from Kojima and film director Guillermo del Toro. The reveal came as a surprise, but nonetheless, Silent Hills quickly became an anticipated title. However, things were not well behind the scenes at Konami. On March 3, 2015, IGN Italia posted an interview with Kojima where he confirmed that Metal Gear Solid 5 would be his final title in the franchise, and that he considered the series complete even if it continued without him. The very same day, Konami announced that they were restructuring their company, and Kojima's name was nowhere to be seen on the list of personnel changes on their website. Within a couple weeks, Konami scrubbed the Kojima Productions logo and the tagline, a Hideo Kojima game, from the Metal Gear website, promotional materials, and even Metal Gear Solid 5's box art. Though there had been no official word from either party, GameSpot reported that there had been a falling out between Kojima and executives at Konami due to power struggles. This resulted in the publisher restricting access to basic corporate resources at Kojima Productions, and demoting most of Kojima's developers to contractors instead of employees. Though there was never any official comment on it, the falling out had become the subject of public scrutiny. In late April of 2015, Konami confirmed that Silent Hills had indeed been cancelled, and pulled PT from the PlayStation Store. They even disallowed users from re-downloading the title if it were no longer on their console. On October 9, 2015, Kojima left the Tokyo office of Kojima Productions, or Number 8 Production Department as Konami had renamed it, for the final time following a going-away party thrown in his honor. Despite photographic proof, Konami feigned ignorance for the reason for this party, asserting that Kojima wasn't leaving the company but rather taking a long vacation. The Los Angeles branch of Kojima Productions, since renamed Konami Los Angeles, was closed the following month. During the 2015 Game Awards after Metal Gear Solid 5 won Best Score and Best Action-Adventure Game, host Jeff Keighley stated that Konami had barred Kojima from attending the show to accept the awards. This news was met with audible boos from the crowd. Finally, on December 15, 2015, Kojima's departure from Konami was made official, though neither Kojima nor Konami ever detailed the official reasons as to why. Still, Kojima took this in stride instead of lashing out at Konami, taking to Twitter to say, "Today marks a new start for me. I'm committed to be involved in creative activities for as long as I live. Look forward to what's coming next." On December 16, 2015, just one day after officially leaving Konami, Kojima founded a newly independent Kojima Productions. Shortly afterwards, a partnership between Kojima Productions and Sony Computer Entertainment was announced, with Kojima to direct a new AAA title. At E3 2016, Kojima dramatically took the stage at Sony's press conference to thunderous applause, stating,
"Hello everyone, I'm back!"
His game was revealed to be Death Stranding, with both Reedus and Del Toro returning from Silent Hills, and several other Hollywood stars later being attached to the game. Death Stranding has proved to be somewhat mysterious, with Kojima stating he hopes the game and a potential sequel would establish a new genre. Death Stranding is set to be released on November 8, 2019. Though the chapter of Hideo Kojima's career at Konami has come to a close, a brand new one is opening up for the developer. From his unique cinematic approach to game development and design, to his use of social media to discuss his love of film with fans, Kojima has cemented his place in multimedia history, an impressive feat for someone whose start in gaming was met with ridicule. Very few developers can say they deserve to label their games with their name, but you know a Hideo Kojima game when you play one. If the music doesn't reflect the unique rhythms of the game, it becomes background music which might as well be piped in from another room. This is a driving philosophy for composer Koji Kondo. Rhythm, balance, and interactivity are the three things that he contemplates most while composing, which has led Kondo's music to be as iconic as the games they come from. While the man himself isn't as well known as Nintendo superstars like Satoru Iwata, Masahiro Sakurai, or Shigeru Miyamoto, his work continues to immeasurably affect the gaming industry and everyone in it. From the dynamic energy of the Mario theme song to the epic scale of The Legend of Zelda's score, the impact of Kondo's music has influenced a generation of musicians and fundamentally changed how video game music is written. This is how a kid playing around on an electric organ became the author of the most recognizable music in gaming. This is Koji Kondo. Koji Kondo was born on August 13, 1961 in Nagoya, Japan. At the age of 5, he started studying the electric organ, specifically the Yamaha Electone. He would later take up the piano during his childhood as well. In middle school, Kondo became a fan of hard rock, particularly the band Deep Purple. In high school, he would often listen to jazz and fusion bands such as Cassiopeia, Sadao Watanabe, Chick Corea, and Herbie Hancock. While Koji Kondo was in some amateur bands during his schooling, he never dreamt of being a lead singer or a guitarist. Instead, he always imagined himself working behind the scenes, playing the keyboard, or working in studios. This desire to create music while avoiding the limelight forged the path he would walk on in his life. It's also worth noting that he first came into contact with video games during this period of his youth. He was mesmerized by the medium after being introduced to Pong. Kondo would later attend the Osaka University of Arts, majoring in art planning, where he studied alongside another future Nintendo employee, Takashi Tezuka. Kondo initially believed he would work as a director or a producer of various arts, furthering his dream of working behind the scenes. His interest in arcade games also grew during this period as the hardware was able to produce more sounds. He fondly remembered playing the games Space Invaders and Donkey Kong 3 at a local coffee shop while at university. Kondo never studied anything directly related to music production, but still used much of his free time to create music. He became interested in the creation process of music on computers, and used the programming language BASIC to make sounds on his personal computer. While Kondo was in university, developers at Nintendo realized how music and sound effects were becoming increasingly important to the design process. Before this, much of the audio and game development was created by programmers, usually as an afterthought. In Kondo's senior year, Nintendo placed an ad for a dedicated sound programmer on the university's job placement board. Kondo saw the ad and decided to apply, following his passion for both creating synthesizers and playing video games. In 1984, Kondo was hired to work in Nintendo's EAD division, becoming the third person Nintendo hired solely for sound and music after Hirokazu Hip Tanaka and Yukio Kanioka. Nintendo would be the only company Kondo ever interviewed for and the only place he has worked for during his entire life. Kondo described getting the job as a lucky break, as he didn't even submit any demo tapes for the position. Kanioka was a mentor for Kondo, giving the younger man advice from Kanioka's time composing on titles like Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Mario Bros. After joining Nintendo, Kondo started work right away. One of his first tasks was recreating the themes for Saze-san and Doraemon, and some Seiko Matsuda songs. This was done in Family Basic, a programming language used to create games for the Famicom. Kondo then worked on the Famicom Basic, writing instructions on how to translate popular music into sounds for the system. More importantly, during this period, he developed his philosophy for creating sounds for games. He later said, "All games contain unique rhythms in some form or another. These rhythms can be found in character movements and also in the timing in which the players press buttons. It's essential to grasp these rhythms and use the ones that represent the most satisfying playing experience and create music based on them." The first game he would ever work on was the arcade version of Punch-Out! This title featured a unique hardware setup with two separate monitors, which meant that there were two separate sound amps. One of the amps was used exclusively for speech, while the other was used for various sound effects such as crowd noises. The title was in production before Koji Kondo joined the company, and was made specifically to appeal to Western audiences. Kaneoka gave Kondo the challenge to make music that resembled a sports TV theme using only the 3 sound channels that were available on the hardware. Kondo delivered, and Punch-Out would become a hit for the company, partially due to the game's music. Interestingly, the theme song for both the arcade and NES release is actually based on a song called Gillette Look Sharp March, which would air during boxing matches in the 1950s. Kondo's next project was Golf, the first of many Famicom and NES titles he would compose for, including soccer, kung fu, volleyball, and the mysterious Murasame Castle, to name a few. Around this time, Kondo collaborated with Shigeru Miyamoto on the title Devil World. While he is only credited for the title's bonus stage music, Miyamoto was nonetheless impressed with Kondo and his work. Kondo was brought over to R&D 4, a new division that was headed by Miyamoto. R&D 4 would later become Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development, one of the company's most accomplished internal studios. Here, Kondo composed for a title that would define both his career and a generation: Super Mario Bros. When tasked for writing the music for this new game, Kondo went through a number of experiments to find the right tone. In an interview with Nintendo Minute, he reflected on this process, explaining, "The first thing I saw was the grass-covered plains, so I wrote this laid-back, relaxed music. However, it didn't really fit the game, so I thought I needed to create music that matched the speed of the game, the speed of Mario running, the liveliness of his jumps, and so I played the game over and over again, and created music that matched the rhythms of the game." The main Mario theme was something that Kondo worked on tirelessly, as he felt it needed to fit the game and enhance the gameplay, while also never becoming tedious. Super Mario Bros. Marked a departure from typical sound design in games, even for Kondo. The audio was developed simultaneously with the game instead of during the title's post-production phase. This led the music and gameplay impacting each other, and Kondo getting feedback from designers and programmers. This resulted in several revisions during development and an overall stronger score. The first piece Kondo finished on Super Mario Bros. Was the underwater theme, because he felt it was easy to imagine a tune for a water level. On the other hand, the underground theme would prove to be a challenge, and Kondo eventually decided to make the music a rhythmic and difficult account, so that players would feel uneasy. The overall development time for Super Mario Bros. Was short, reportedly less than 1 year, but Kondo worked on tuning his tracks to fit the game endlessly. His efforts paid off, as almost every single track from the Super Mario Bros. Score is beloved to this day. With Mario finished, Kondo moved on to another game that would spawn a highly influential series, The Legend of Zelda. With Mario, Kondo wanted the style to feel similar to popular music. However, when tasked to write the score for a fantasy setting, he felt it would be best to make the music have an otherworldly feel. Interestingly, Kondo originally intended to use the piece Bolero by composer Maurice Ravel as The Legend of Zelda's title theme, but late in development discovered that the song had not yet entered the public domain. This forced Kondo to create a new arrangement of the game's overworld theme in under a day, which has become an iconic part of the franchise. Andrew Schartman, author of Koji Kondo's Super Mario Bros. Soundtrack, explained, "Zelda music is epic. What makes it special, however, is how Kondo combines so many different genres into something entirely his own. Gregorian chant, Hollywood fantasy, rustic folk, 20th century classical, the overworld theme was inspired by Bolero, and medieval troubadour all melded into one. It was a new kind of music, really, something that had never been heard before, especially when dressed up in synthesized sounds." A third franchise that Kondo was integral in was the sci-fi space shooter series Star Fox. Though he did not compose the original score for Star Fox on the SNES, Kondo worked closely with the designers and programmers at Argonaut Software to create the game's iconic sound effects. These included the gibberish voices used for the characters' dialogue. Star Fox programmer Dylan Cuthbert told Did You Know Gaming,
"Koji Kondo, he dragged me into the music room one day to record some of the voices that he used in during the game. And even now, I don't know which voices he used that were mine, because I think he actually combined them together and tried to make them sound like they were from an alien planet or something."
Cuthbert also noted that Kondo was always kind to the developers he worked with. Kondo even stopped during a demonstration of Wii Music at E3 when he noticed Cuthbert in the audience and wanted to talk to him. Many of the games that Kondo worked on would become successful enough to spawn long-lasting franchises. Though Kondo wasn't always the sole composer for these games, more often than not he contributed music or supervised the soundtracks to ensure they were up to his standards. He returned to the Star Fox franchise with Star Fox 64, this time co-writing its soundtrack with Hajime Wakai. Kondo composed the game's iconic main theme, the menu music, and the fanfares that played at the beginning and end of levels. His work on Star Fox 64 remains unique in his discography, taking a direction far more like Hollywood sci-fi blockbusters than any of his other soundtracks. Kondo's choices for Star Fox 64's score have become the definitive musical direction for the series, which still draws inspiration from Kondo's work for this title. One of the most recognizable titles Kondo composed for was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, a game that revolved heavily around the use of diegetic music for its gameplay. As IGN pointed out in their review, the buttons on the N64's controller used to play the ocarina in-game actually resembles the layout of a real ocarina. This only furthered Kondo's goal of creating truly interactive and immersive music. Though the core of what would become Zelda's musical themes were composed for A Link to the Past, many of the pieces that originated in Ocarina of Time have become particularly integral to the Zelda franchise. Kondo also created many variations of the music for this title, fearing that players would get bored hearing the same overworld music over and over. He opted to have 12 different phrases of music and have them play in a random order. These would mesh in a way that the player wouldn't overtly notice, but would always keep the music feeling fresh. In addition, this same strategy was used to dynamically change the music if the player entered or left a battle, or if they simply stood still. This sort of interactivity, even if it was not immediately noticeable, has always been a driving force in the way Kondo approached his music design. This often meant going against his own instincts, or against popular requests from fans in the media. An excellent example of this can be found in The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Though Kondo did not compose for this title, he was the sound supervisor for the project. After many requests from members of the media and following his own preference for live music, Kondo initially envisioned Twilight Princess's music being performed by a 50-piece orchestra. However, further into development, Kondo opted to use MIDI-based sequenced music instead, simply because it offered more control and interactivity for the player. For example, the dynamically changing music in the sequence where the player chases Skull Kid was created by integrating the sequenced music into the game's surround sound. This in turn allowed the player to spatially locate the Skull Kid. This same strategy was used in another game that Kondo co-composed, Super Mario Sunshine, when the player is chasing Shadow Mario. In 2007, Kondo gave a speech at the Game Developers Conference where he expanded on his thoughts about the interactivity of music in games. He noted that games, and specifically character movement, operates on an internal computer clock. He believes it's natural for music to follow these same parameters, so music can interact with character action and music. The new Super Mario Bros. Series is perhaps one of the most notable examples of this, as enemies react in tune with the music. In fact, the Mario franchise has been one of the standard bearers for Kondo's philosophy, and its impact on the series can be tracked all the way back to Super Mario Bros. In this game, when the player is almost out of time to complete a level, the music would speed up. In Super Mario World, drums were added to the music anytime Mario rode a Yoshi, in hopes of making the player feel more powerful without disrupting the music. This idea was pushed even farther with Super Mario 64's Jolly Roger Bay, which incorporates strings into the composition whenever Mario enters the water. Drums and bass are similarly added to highlight the sense of adventure as Mario enters the level's caverns and caves. As sound supervisor, Kondo wrote 4 tracks for 2007's Super Mario Galaxy, while Mahito Yokota took on the rest. Yokota was in charge of the musical direction during the title's development, and originally envisioned a Latin American-inspired score in a cute style that would appeal to children. When Yokota presented this to Kondo, it was rejected outright. Kondo told Yokota, "If somewhere in your mind you have an image that Mario is cute, please get rid of it." Kondo insisted that Mario's character was cool instead, and encouraged Yokota to try again. The pair worked together to brainstorm 3 music samples in 3 different genres, with Kondo writing one of them and Yokota writing the other 2. When Yokota presented the 3 pieces to Shigeru Miyamoto to decide the direction of the music, Miyamoto chose an orchestral piece because it sounded the most space-like. This was the one that Kondo wrote, which Miyamoto was unaware of while making his decision. Super Mario Galaxy's score features 28 tracks performed by a 50-piece live orchestra, similar to the setup that Kondo originally envisioned for Twilight Princess. Early on, this concerned Kondo, fearing it would somehow take away from the freedom of the player, who might feel obligated to play in time with the music. To solve this issue, the orchestra played all of the tracks to multiple different tempos, allowing for dynamic shifts in the music during gameplay and for sound effects to be more easily synced with the pieces. When describing his writing process, Kondo said that inspiration usually strikes him in unexpected places. He told Polygon that he has rarely been able to come up with the melodies for the main theme in any game he's worked on while at his office. Kondo said, "Usually I'll be in the bathtub. It's like, oh, there it is. Or I'll be sleeping and the melody is in my head. Or even, I'll be walking down the hallway in my house. Suddenly the music pops into my head." Regardless, Kondo considers the process of composition for a game to be collaborative, and he doesn't even begin to work until he has an opportunity to meet with a project's director and designers. He then begins brainstorming ideas, talking to the developers to get a sense of what kind of music would fit with the tone and setting of the game. He only begins composing after he's had an opportunity to play a prototype of a game, tinkering with it until he feels like he understands how it works. Koji Kondo and his influence on the industry has been immeasurable. His work on Mario and Zelda alone makes him one of the most impactful composers in all of gaming, and his music has transcended the medium into the general consciousness of pop culture. The Mario theme song is such a staple that in 2006 it ranked on Billboard's Hot Ringtones chart for 112 weeks straight. Kondo even had the honor of meeting Sir Paul McCartney when the singer came to Japan. Kondo said, "I went backstage with Miyamoto and a few others, and when Miyamoto was kind enough to introduce me as the composer of Mario, Paul McCartney started singing the overworld background music from the original game. It had been many years since its debut, so I was surprised he knew it, and I was really happy." In 2008, Kondo was honored at the Computer Entertainment Developers Conference's first award show, accepting an award on behalf of Nintendo's sound team for their work on the Legend of Zelda franchise. Additionally, his work on both Super Mario Galaxy 2 and Super Mario 3D World were nominated for Best Original Music at the BAFTA Game Awards. Kondo's music has frequently been performed by various symphonies from around the world, with Kondo himself occasionally conducting them. At the 2014 Game Awards, he even performed alongside American rock band Imagine Dragons. In the early 1990s, Kondo explained that as the hardware progresses, the quality of music improves, and soon game music will have to compete on the same level as general music. I want to take on those new challenges. This forward-thinking ideology, along with his drive to make his music as interactive as the games they were written for, has solidified Kondo as not only one of the greatest musicians in the gaming industry, but as one of the most beloved composers of the modern era. His career has been long and storied, and with Kondo returning to the composer's podium for Super Mario Maker 2, it's far from over. Even if you haven't played any of the games he's developed, it's likely that you have in some way been influenced by the work of Gabe Newell. From Valve to Steam to the HTC Vive, Newell and his products are titans in the PC gaming market. Yet, Newell did not begin his career as a game developer. Instead, he was working on operating systems and porting games to Windows simply because he wanted a challenge. This is the story of how a Harvard dropout became the head of one of gaming's most influential publishers. This is Gabe Newell. Gabe Newell was born on November 3, 1962 in Seattle, Washington. However, early in his life, his family moved to Davis, California near Sacramento, where he grew up. After graduating high school in 1980, Newell began attending Harvard University. However, around 1983, Newell visited his brother who had just gotten a job at a new tech startup in Seattle called Microsoft. And though he expected to spend a great deal of this trip traveling around the city with his brother, Newell instead spent most of his time at his brother's workplace. Steve Ballmer, then Microsoft head of sales, was annoyed at Newell's presence at the company and told the student that if he was going to be hanging around Microsoft's offices, he was going to have to work. Newell spent 3 months helping the programmers at Microsoft during this period, which he would later describe as his biggest learning experience as a software developer. He felt that working with programmers on real products was much more useful than making dummy programs in school. He elaborated, "Not to bang on Harvard, but I learned more in the 3 months with those guys at Microsoft than I did the entire time I was at Harvard. At Harvard, I learned how to drink beer while doing a headstand in the snow, which, it's a useful skill, but not nearly as useful as how to actually develop software." Newell was eventually convinced to drop out of Harvard in 1983 after a discussion with Ballmer, and he was officially employed at Microsoft shortly afterwards. Newell worked as a so-called producer at the company for some time, helping create the first 3 releases of their Windows operating system. During this time, making and playing games on Windows was difficult. As Newell explained, it was common knowledge that it wasn't possible to write a good game in Windows because of, unnamed technical reasons. The idea that Windows wasn't considered a suitable gaming platform annoyed Newell and others at Microsoft, who decided to prove everyone wrong and find the most technically advanced game possible so that they could port it to Windows. In 1993, id Software released their revolutionary first-person shooter Doom on MS-DOS, and it became the most used piece of computer software in the United States, ahead of even Windows itself. And when Newell and his team came across Doom, they knew it was the game they had to port. As Newell put it, he felt that Doom could show what PC games could do. This was a lot better than your NES system or your Sega system. Newell personally called John Carmack and Jay Wilbur of id Software, explaining his intentions and offering for Microsoft to port the game to Windows for free, an offer that Carmack and Wilbur accepted. Their work eventually resulted in Doom 95, released on August 20th, 1996. Much to Newell's satisfaction, this Windows 95 compatible version of Doom showed game developers that Windows was a viable gaming platform, contrary to previous industry opinion. And along with the development of WinG, the precursor to Microsoft's DirectX gaming interface, Newell's port of Doom helped place Windows as the de facto platform for PC gaming for decades. It also arguably cemented Windows as the dominant overall operating system compared with its competitors on Mac and Linux. Newell himself described this effect in 2012, saying that, quote, "People don't realize how critical games are in driving consumer purchasing behavior." Doom also ended up having a lasting impact on Newell's tastes. He counts the game amongst his 3 favorites of all time, as it convinced him that video games were the future of entertainment. His other favorites are Star Trek for the Bros mainframe, which was the first game he ever played, and Nintendo's Super Mario 64, which convinced him that games were art. After completing their port of Doom, Newell kept in touch with the game developers at id Software. Around this time, Michael Abrish, one of Newell's co-workers, left Microsoft to work at id, and Abrish told Newell about the games id was working on at every opportunity. Additionally, Newell was becoming increasingly unhappy working at Microsoft, later explaining, "This was about the time that Microsoft was making the transition from cool, agile software company that was whipping IBM's butt to evil empire status, so working on games kept sounding more and more attractive." Eventually, Abrish told Newell about the new game engine it was developing and their flagship title for it, a first-person shooter called Quake. Newell later recalled that Abrish was far more excited for the engine than he was for the game, with Abrish explaining that, quote, "Quake will be the worst game done on the Quake engine." Shortly afterwards, Newell decided to quit his job at Microsoft alongside his friend and co-worker Mike Harrington. The pair had become considerably wealthy during their tenures at Microsoft, and decided to invest much of this money into game development. Shortly after quitting, Newell and Harrington visited id Software's headquarters in Texas, though some of the developers at id were reluctant to even talk to the two of them. As Abrish remembered, "Let's put it this way, it wasn't like when 9 Inch Nails came to visit. That was a cool thing. These were the guys that worked on stuff like Microsoft Bob and home automation." However, Abrish vouched for Newell and Harrington, and the pair left id's headquarters with the source code for Quake, a license to use it, and the determination to leave their own impact on gaming. On August 24th, 1996, Newell and Harrington officially co-founded a new development studio called Valve Software on the east side of Seattle. Interestingly, this was done on the same day as Newell's wedding. When visiting id, Newell was also given a list of talented developers working with the Quake engine, and Newell and Harrington recruited several of them to work at the newly founded Valve Software. Notably among these developers were Steve Bond and John Guthrie, who ran the popular Quake Command website. Other new employees included industry veterans from companies such as 3D Realms, Shiny Entertainment, and other former Microsoft developers. With their company now established and filled with employees, Newell and Valve set about developing their very first game, a horror-centric first-person shooter to be published by Sierra Entertainment. For this title, Newell and his team wanted to create an experience that would scare players as much as Doom had. The three-dimensional action game was Newell's favorite genre, but he felt like there was still a lot of room for improvement. By the end of development, nearly 70% of the Quake engine's code was modified, with Valve's programmers adding skeletal animations and direct 3D support. This code would later become the base of their own gaming engine, known as Source. Newell and his team understood that this first title wasn't going to be exactly everything they wanted it to be, but Newell was far more concerned with just finishing and releasing it. Instead of falling into perfectionist tendencies, Newell refused to be picky, fearing that it would bankrupt his new company. As Abrish explained, Valve set out to do a Class B game and not a Class A game. The model for starting a company, and the one I think Gabe and Mike followed, is to just ship something. The final product that resulted from this development cycle was Half-Life, a story-driven first-person shooter with a narrative told without cutscenes. Half-Life was nothing but a learning experience for Newell and the developers at Valve, who had no idea what was going to be important and irrelevant to development. The story and puzzle-driven nature of the gameplay was also a risk, but it ended up setting Half-Life apart from many of its competitors. And though its development was not without the occasional bump or roadblock, Half-Life was released on November 18th, 1998 to an overwhelmingly positive reception from developers, critics, and gamers alike. To put it simply, Half-Life put Newell and his company on the map, earning more than 50 Game of the Year awards and selling nearly 10 million copies by 2009. Arguably the most important person this game impressed, however, was Newell himself. He explained, "I was sitting here testing multiplayer and I was thinking, damn, this is really cool. At the end of other projects, I'm usually more neutral about them when they go out the door with an acute awareness of everything you'd like to have added. I didn't feel like that with Half-Life." Half-Life cemented Valve and Newell as a force to be reckoned with in the gaming industry, and the title's success saw several Valve-backed expansions and ports to the title. However, instead of letting this success run to his head, Newell decided to approach their community with a great deal of openness. Alongside Half-Life, Valve released Worldcraft, a program they used to design levels, and their software development kit, later known as Gold Source, allowing independent designers to easily create mods for the game. Several of these modders would later receive official support from Valve or be hired at the company. In fact, many games first released as mods for Half-Life became pillars of Valve's IP catalog, including Team Fortress, Counter-Strike, and Day of Defeat. Both of Valve's other primary franchises, Portal and Left 4 Dead, were similarly born from Newell and his company keeping an eye out for other talented students or independent developers, and bringing them on board the company in an official capacity. Shortly after Half-Life's release, Valve began development on a sequel to their game, and the company invested heavily in new technology for it. This included the Source Engine, a new version of the Gold Source development kit, which was just as open to modding and independent development as its predecessor. However, during Half-Life 2's development, Newell and Valve noticed that they were having difficulty providing updates for everyone who purchased their games. To solve this problem, the company decided to create a new platform that could update all of their users online. Though Newell took pride in being heavily involved with Half-Life's development, he stepped away from the day-to-day development of Half-Life 2 to work on this online distribution program. Newell had a large vision for the system, believing that his company could create a new retail space that would cut out the corporate middleman and directly benefit both small independent developers and established publishers. By releasing games through the platform, these companies stood to earn $30 or more for every copy sold, versus the roughly $7 for every copy sold in a brick-and-mortar store. It would also be easier to sell games on this digital platform, as many indie developers did not have the connections or resources to release physical games at retail. Steam was announced at the Game Developers Conference in 2002, began beta testing with Counter-Strike 1.6 in 2003, and was officially launched on September 12, 2003. When Valve released Half-Life 2 on November 16, 2004, it marked the first title to require the installation of Steam to play on PC. Since then, Steam has grown into the premier gaming marketplace on the PC, with thousands of games in its library and frequent sales that encourage gamers to buy and play more games. More than 1.5 billion games sold on the platform by 2014, and its library of content has grown to include non-gaming software and films. The success of Steam cannot be overstated. It literally changed the way games were bought, sold, and developed on PC, and several publishers like EA and Ubisoft have followed Valve's example with their own similar services. One person unsurprised by Valve's success with Steam was Newell himself, who shot down skeptics worried about piracy on PC early in Steam's lifespan. Newell follows the philosophy that people will buy content legally when it is convenient and easy for them to do so. He explained this reasoning in an interview shortly after Steam launched in Russia, stating, "We think there is a fundamental misconception about piracy. Piracy is almost always a service problem and not a pricing problem. If a pirate offers a product anywhere in the world 24/7 purchasable from the convenience of your personal computer, and the legal provider says the product is region-locked, will come to your country 3 months after the US release and can only be purchased at a brick-and-mortar store, then the pirate service is more valuable." Keeping in line with his history of pushing boundaries, Newell used Steam's success to push Valve towards experimenting with various different monetization and release models. These included episodic releases with Half-Life 2 Episodes 1 and 2, game compilations like the Orange Box, and later microtransaction-driven free-to-play games with Team Fortress 2 and Dota 2. However, Newell also decided to help push the boundaries of what games meant in popular culture even further, throwing his weight behind the burgeoning esports scene. Though esports had been a blossoming community for decades and started gaining real traction in the mid-2000s, it had difficulty breaking into the mainstream. This changed in the early 2010s when several new esports tournaments with multi-million-dollar prize pools were founded, including the Valve-organized Dota International. The International has become so successful that it draws thousands of people to Seattle's Key Arena every year, a venue usually reserved for major concerts, shows, and sporting events. Though it has been extensively covered on the live streaming website Twitch, in 2014 the International was also covered on live TV in the United States by ESPN. In an interview with ESPN, Newell explained why he and Valve were pushing esports, saying, "The internet is changing what entertainment and sports is. It's not just a few people authoring an experience for others. It's really growing out of what everybody does. Every single element of the game allows the community itself to participate and create." In many ways, Newell and Valve have become more than just a game designer and developer. They've evolved into technologic innovators. This is perhaps most clearly illustrated in Newell and Valve's most prominent project of the last 5 years, virtual reality and motion technology like their VR headset, the HTC Vive. Newell is so invested in the new direction that in 2016 he admitted to spending most of his time at Valve working with their VR team. Still, he's keeping a level head on the prospects of the new technology, saying, quote, "I think VR is going great. It's going in a way that's consistent with our expectations. We're also pretty comfortable with the idea that it will turn out to be a complete failure." For his entire career, instead of looking back on his past successes and creating more of the same, Gabe Newell has instead spent time looking to the future, towards what games and technologies would make the biggest impact on the lives of his consumers. And though this has meant a decline in Valve's output of games in recent years, Newell's impact on the industry cannot be understated. Because of his work, PC gaming on Windows was proven viable. The way games are released online completely changed. And in the future, maybe the way we experience games altogether will be revolutionized. Great games are played, not made. This is a driving philosophy for Todd Howard, game director and executive producer at Bethesda Game Studios. The phrase has since become the Bethesda mantra, coined during the development of The Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind, their first major title led by Howard. Since then, under Howard's leadership, the company has risen from a developer struggling to survive to one of the fastest-growing powerhouse publishers in the entire industry. This is the story of how Todd Howard grew from a young college student unable to get a job as a designer to an experienced developer shepherding the creation of some of the biggest RPGs ever released. Todd Howard was born in 1971 in the small Pennsylvania suburb of Lower Macungie Township. He developed an interest in technology and video games at a young age, convincing his parents to buy him an Apple II computer. Howard cites wizardry as the title that first inspired him to make games, and Ultima 3 as his biggest influence. He also taught himself how to program and began writing his own crude games when he was very young. Origin Systems, the company behind the Ultima games, quickly became Howard's favorite developer because he felt that they didn't just make games, they crafted entire worlds that the player could travel to. In particular, he respected the way Origin developed Ultimas 3 through 7, as they completely overhauled their development tools and systems with each new title, truly improving upon their work. This was a philosophy that would come to guide Howard's own projects. Howard attended the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and though he desired to focus on game development, he majored in finance. Howard later explained that he took this subject as it seemed like, quote, the easiest way through school. Despite this, Howard would often go to the campus's computer labs after class and install Wing Commander on one of their desktops so that he could play. Several times the workstation where he'd installed Wing Commander had already been taken, and he eventually decided that it was too time-consuming to install the game on a new computer every day. Howard used this as an excuse to convince his parents to buy him his own computer, telling them that it would help his workflow. At some point, Howard acquired a copy of Wayne Gretzky Hockey 3, developed by Bethesda Games. After looking at the company's address on the box, he realized that their offices were along the commute home from his college for the holidays. On a whim, while still attending school, Howard applied to work at the company, only to be declined and told to apply again once he'd graduated. And after completing his education, Howard tried once more, but was again declined. It wasn't until 1994 that Bethesda would officially hire Todd Howard. He began his work for Bethesda right after The Elder Scrolls Arena was released. Some cite his first task for the company as converting the game from MS-DOS to CD disk. This would be his first work on the series that would earn him his fame and acclaim in the industry. The first project Howard worked on at Bethesda in a real capacity was 1995's Terminator Future Shock, a first-person shooter based in the universe of the Terminator franchise. This title was one of the first to use fully texture-mapped three-dimensional environments. It also pioneered the use of mouse-based camera controls months before Quake popularized the idea. Future Shock wouldn't be Howard's only brush with the Terminator franchise. His next work was as a designer on 1996's Terminator Skynet. Though it was originally conceived as just an expansion pack for Future Shock, Skynet slowly grew larger and larger before becoming its own game. On August 31st, 1996, Bethesda released their sequel to Arena, titled The Elder Scrolls: Daggerfall, which featured a massive open world. Bethesda themselves boast that it was roughly the size of Great Britain, around 230,000 square kilometers. In reality, it was actually closer to 161,000 square kilometers, slightly smaller but no less impressive. Thousands of villages dot the landscape of Daggerfall, populated by literally hundreds of thousands of NPCs. With so much content, there was no way the designers could craft it all by hand, so parts of Daggerfall's world were randomly generated, including much of its wilderness and several building interiors. In retrospect, it would seem obvious that this would take a toll on the game, with some critics describing the world and characters within it as monotonous. Criticism that Bethesda, and perhaps Howard himself, would take to heart. In 1998, Howard was given his first opportunity to lead a project at Bethesda. Inspired by titles like Tomb Raider and Prince of Persia, the company sought to create a series of action-adventure games under the Elder Scrolls Adventures banner, and the first title in this planned franchise was known as Redguard. A very different approach to the Elder Scrolls universe. Redguard was a third-person action RPG with linear progression rather than a first-person RPG with an explorable open world. Redguard also featured a main character with a set name and race, Cyrus the Restless, instead of letting the player create their own character. While Redguard was a solid game that found decent commercial success, it was a symptom of a much larger problem at Bethesda. The company went through some troubled times during the late 90s after Daggerfall's release. Between projects like Redguard, Battle Spire, and the cancelled 10th Planet, the studio spread itself too thin and was in danger of going out of business. Things were looking quite bleak until the year 2000 when Bethesda was acquired by ZeniMax Media, a move that Howard described as giving us kind of a new lease on life, and the company moved forward with a new installment in the Elder Scrolls franchise. Though he was in charge of this project and the entire future of Bethesda potentially rested on his shoulders, Howard wasn't afraid and poured his all into this game. He explained, "The studio had gotten that small and I was in charge of Morrowind, but by that time, once you get to that point, there was an element of no fear. What's the worst that could happen? We could go out of business. Well, let's go all in. This is the game. Let's put all our chips on the table. This is the game people want from us. This is the game we want to do." The developers scrapped the engine they had used in previous titles and made a completely new one powered by Microsoft's Direct 3D software. Remembering the criticisms of Daggerfall and taking cues from his experience with Redguard, Howard and his team decided to craft almost everything in Morrowind by hand instead of randomly generating assets. To accomplish this, Bethesda tripled its staff and spent the entirety of Morrowind's first year of development creating the Elder Scrolls Construction Kit, a file system that allowed designers to tweak and rebalance aspects of the title quickly and on a small scale instead of broad, inaccurate strokes. Howard would affectionately refer to it as a role-playing operating system. The construction set shipped with Morrowind and spawned an active modding community, one that remains with Bethesda's titles to this day. By the end of development, Howard and his staff put in close to 100 man-years to create Morrowind, which was released on the PC on May 1st, 2002, and ported to the Xbox on June 6th, 2002. The game was a massive success, with critics praising the size and scope of its world and the amount of detail Bethesda was able to cram in it. The title sold more than 4 million copies in its lifetime and remains a massively important game for the studio, so much so that bits of its code remain in everything Bethesda Game Studios makes to this day, for better and for worse. After Morrowind's success, Howard and his team at Bethesda did not rest and instead looked to the future. In 2002, they split their team, with artists and designers going to work on Morrowind's expansions, Tribunal and Blood Moon, and programmers beginning work on their next major title, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. While Morrowind's lead designer Ken Ralston oversaw the development team, Howard himself was promoted to executive producer. Bethesda took their time with this game, giving it a 4-year development cycle. Howard explained that they did this so Oblivion could be a reinvention of Morrowind and stand on its own. Harkening back to his influences with Ultima, Howard believed that this approach would capture much of what made Bethesda's past titles so exciting in the first place. While there were fewer NPCs and quests, in Oblivion greater care was put into each of their design and writing. Quests would have multiple branching paths, and characters would have more unique personalities. For the main quest, the team decided against having the player be a chosen one, as they'd been in their earlier games. Instead, they believed it would be more interesting to have the player character track down and help the chosen one. Though there was quite a bit of voice acting in Morrowind, Oblivion was fully voiced and featured several prominent actors, including Patrick Stewart, Sean Bean, and Terrence Stamp. Use of mainstream actors would become the norm in Bethesda's following titles. Just as they'd done with Morrowind, Bethesda decided to throw out their current technology and crafted a new engine for Oblivion. The final product was a mixture of in-house tech and Numerical Designs' Gamebryo engine. Other new technology was also incorporated into the game, including various physics engines, facial animation and lip-syncing tech, and environmental development tools like the foliage-creating speed tree. A radiant AI system was also implemented, which made NPC behavior more dynamic. All of these changes paid off, as Oblivion received universal acclaim from critics, resting at a monumental 94 out of 100 on Metacritic. By November of 2011, the title had sold over 3.5 million copies. While Oblivion was a success and the future was looking bright for Howard and his team at Bethesda, elsewhere in the industry, things weren't as cheerful. For years, Black Isle Studios and Interplay Entertainment's Fallout 3, then codenamed Van Buren, languished in development hell. And in 2004, the struggling Interplay struck a deal with Bethesda to allow their developers to produce and publish several Fallout games. Bethesda eventually obtained the Fallout license permanently. While Howard and his team started pre-production on Fallout 3 in 2004, principal development did not begin until Oblivion was released in 2006. For this new title, Howard once again stepped into the role of producer while simultaneously acting as director. The title was similar in scope to Oblivion, but offered a unique challenge for Howard and his team, as its post-apocalyptic capital Wasteland was a very different setting from the familiar Tamriel. Regardless, Bethesda approached Fallout 3 the same way they'd approached Morrowind and Oblivion, allowing their ideas for its world to grow organically. Because the Fallout universe was so thick with its own lore, a solid foundation had already been built, calming fears amongst some in the development team that Fallout 3 wouldn't have its own tone. Upon its release, Fallout 3 was an even bigger hit than Oblivion, selling 4.7 million copies by the end of 2008. It averaged a 91 out of 100 on Metacritic, and because of the tremendous success of Fallout 3, Bethesda's parent company decided that a sequel should be fast-tracked. However, instead of handing the project to Howard and his team, the reins were instead given to Obsidian Entertainment, a developer formed by several former Fallout 2 developers from Black Isle Studios. This decision was made for good reason, as Howard and Bethesda Game Studios wanted to revisit the world of Tamriel. Plans for the next Elder Scrolls game were put in place after Oblivion's release in 2006, but again, development did not hit full steam until Fallout 3's release in 2008. With this new title, Howard yearned to return to the style of Morrowind. He wanted players to be able to explore a distinct and unique culture, as opposed to the classic Tolkien-inspired high fantasy setting in Oblivion's Cyrodiil. He also wished for the player's race to have a larger impact on gameplay. To accomplish this, Skyrim, the home of the proud but often xenophobic Nords, was chosen. Just like with Oblivion and Morrowind, a new engine was developed for Skyrim, built to further the possibilities of Gamebryo. This new toolset, called the Creation Engine, was also built with a creation kit that allowed developers to tweak content on a small scale. Similar to the Elder Scrolls construction set, it also allowed for modders to easily craft their ideas and put them into the game, a practice that was now a staple for Bethesda's releases. Skyrim was released on November 11, 2011 to near universal acclaim. It furthered the success of both Fallout 3 and Oblivion, hitting true mainstream appeal and selling over 20 million copies as of June 2013. A huge contributor to Skyrim's achievements may have been Howard's philosophy towards game design. He believes that a developer could create a huge design document detailing exactly what a game was going to do, but designers often get too attached to these ideas. Instead, Howard suggests that developers should just put ideas into their game and see what works, without feeling afraid to kill features that simply don't. An example of one such feature in Skyrim was the title's dragons. They began as a single page in the Skyrim design document, describing how encounters with the beasts should feel. The idea grew and became an integral part of the experience. Howard maintains that features grown naturally like this are the best parts of their games. Whenever a new game from Bethesda is released, many people ask for the company to simply add more content. While doing this is important, Howard believes his team should instead focus on combining superfluous ideas and systems to make what the player does, who they are, and what they do more meaningful. Whether or not this has always been beneficial is up for debate, but it's clear that if there's any flaw with Howard and his team's philosophies on creating games, it's that they are too ambitious. For better and for worse, that is respectable in its own right. This was evident with the studio's latest release, Fallout 4, which sacrificed many of its predecessors' deep role-playing mechanics for a far more streamlined approach to game design, while simultaneously adding town-building mechanics and a fully voiced player character. Bethesda also worked with Microsoft to bring user-created mods to their home console, with Sony following suit with a much more stripped-down version of the feature. Fallout 4 has been the company's biggest launch yet, shipping more than 12 million copies in just a single day. Howard's leadership has treated his company well, earning nearly all of their games multiple Game of the Year awards and allowing Bethesda to expand and bring more talented studios into their fold, including the celebrated id Software and Dishonored developer Arcane Studios. Much of the company's success has been attributed to Howard's leadership on their flagship RPGs, which has also earned him personal acclaim. In 2012, he was named Best Game Director by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, one of the highest awards in the industry. And in 2014, he received the Laura of Honor, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the German Game Awards. Finally, in 2017, the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences inducted Howard as the 22nd member of their Hall of Fame. Todd Howard is a man that started as an excited gamer eager to work in the industry he loved, but grew into a passionate leader responsible for some of the most celebrated RPGs of the modern age. Hopefully, his story is far from over.